Trucker Dump, episode 145. Hey, if you've ever been interested in how oversize overweight loads work, you're in luck. Today we talk to Travis Jellison, who has pulled loads as heavy as 216 feet wide, 15 and a half feet tall, and 120 feet long. Yikes. In the news segment, we discuss how the coronavirus is affecting the trucking industry with regards to the loss of work and restaurants, and hours of service changes. We also look at technology such as electric vehicles and its lack of infrastructure, CDL skills testing, and how 5G's networks can help the trucking industry. Freight brokering gets its fair share of talk time too. Truckers and medication, toll hikes, and gross injustices like the prison release of a bad trucking CEO, and what is considered a preventable accident when it comes to the CSA. And in the feedback section, we're going to hear from some new Trucker Dump Slack members, awesome stories about buying grass and ducks, and we'll also hear about a really cool, unique trucking job. This episode of Trucker Dump is sponsored by Volvo Trucks and Pilot Flying J.
Welcome to Trucker Dump, where you'll get one driver's insights and sometimes humorous views of truck driving and the trucking industry, and pretty much anything else he feels like dumping on you. This podcast is brought to you by AboutTruckDriving.com, resources to help you understand the world of truck driving through the use of stories and a pathetic attempt at humor.
Holy moly, Trucker Dumpers, you better watch out tonight because I'm all jacked up on hot blueberry tea. You know, it always takes me a long time to get started on this podcast, and here I am, fifth, sixth, finally get it right, and the evil overlord pops her head in and starts yelling. Stay tuned to the bloopers to hear that one. I'm finally going, though. Anyway, I got more reason than hot tea to be jacked up about this episode. You remember it? I had just gotten laid off a few weeks earlier. Well, this time, just 2 weeks ago, I got reinstated, so I am back at work. I am still on that little crappy Kansas City bid, but hey, it is better than nothing. No, I kind of had mixed feelings about this, because, I was sitting at home playing video games to make, a little over $800 a week with the, the unemployment. And then I am making so much more that it's really worth going back to work for. But hey, I'll take it any way I can get it. For those new to the show, my name is Todd McCann. I am your host, obviously. I am a trucker. 3 years in June. I can't remember. Have I been saying 23 years for the past few months? I may have. Anyway, it'll be 23 years in June. And I am also the author of 2 trucking ebooks. One is called How to Find a Great Truck, called Trucking Life. And you can check both those out at abouttruckdriving.com. And there's a 25% discount if you order them both. I mentioned playing video games a lot on my break. I had stuff related to my blog, related to this podcast, related to my third book, which is on the way. I don't know if I've ever said that before, but that is on the way. I did get some of that edited, but most of the time, honestly, I just screwed off. So, video games with the nephews, they got me into a game called Destiny, which is a third-person shooter. Scratch that and make that a first-person shooter, and I pretty much suck at it. I'm not as bad as I think they thought I was. Not very good at it, and I did learn a new phrase while playing that game. I'm dead. I'd say it about every 10 seconds or so. It's not quite that bad, but sometimes it seems like it's like, that guy over there. I'm dead. And that's kind of the way it goes. But anyway, had a lot of fun doing that, and now I'm kind of addicted to the game. So anyway, I guess we better get on with this because we got probably what's going to be news today. Plus we have what I think is going to turn out to be a pretty long interview about oversize trucking. Had a lot of fun on this one, but I think it's going to be long. So let's get on with it. Let's get on with that news. Gee, was it? Let's get on with it. Let's get on with the news. Professional, I am not. Oh, one more thing before we get started. I hope you are okay from the COVID and everything, this new COVID world we live in, or anything. I shouldn't. I know that seems kind of insensitive about joking about things like this, and I am truly sorry if you have lost somebody or, in your family, or somebody who's come down with it. And let's be honest, less than 1%, I think, at this junction are actually dying from this. So perhaps a bit overblown. We'll see in the long run. Anyway, I hope you are well and good, and I hope help you to figure out what you're supposed to do about this COVID if you get it while you're out on the road. I know that has to really suck. And if you have had experience with COVID symptoms or anything like that, please write in and tell me about it. I'd love to hear about it. More sympathy, which I'm not famous for. My email address is truckerdump@gmail.com. Let us get along with the news now. It's news segment the last few months with the same statement that this is a drawback of having a monthly podcast instead of having a weekly podcast, but it is what it is. Well, the first story relates to that exactly because it's probably old news to most. This comes from Transport Topics, which is ttnews.com. This is, the FMCSA is extending the hours of service emergency declaration for a second time. So, like I said, you probably already heard about this, and if you're most certainly have heard about it. This initial extension had been issued on March 13th, and it was good through May 15th, but they have extended that even further through June 14th. Already hauling this stuff, you already know all about this, and you're up to speed on it. And honestly, by the time you listen to this podcast, June 14th may be already come and gone. Quite honestly, I'm a little surprised they did extend this of this crisis and everything, but a lot of this was for medical supplies and toilet paper and things like that. And the Walmart that I go to, the shelves are pretty much completely stocked again. They have pretty much are lacking a little bit in as the disinfecting wipes, like the Clorox wipes and stuff like that. But they get those every once in a while, and you can go in there and grab some if you want. So it's not been that big of a deal. I'm a little surprised they extended this out through. Be a little shocked, quite honestly, if it went past June 14th. But hey, what do I know? I don't work for the FMCSA. They make these decisions. So anyway, if you're interested in this, check out the link in the show notes. And although you hate over again, the show notes are probably in your podcast app if you're listening in a podcast app. And honestly, let me take a break here. I got an email from David, our old friend David White, who was and he was, just the last couple episodes, and he was asking if he should go to Spotify and just listen to it there. And that brought up a subject which, here's the thing. You listen however you. If you have a choice, please don't listen in Spotify or an app like Stitcher or something like that. The best way you can possibly subscribe and listen to the show is on a specific app like the Apple Podcast, through Google Play, or an Android app like Podcast Addict or something like that, or the mini iOS podcast apps like Overcast or Pocket Cast. All of these. And one of the things that they actually do is give you extra features that, the basic, that some of these others don't have, like Spotify and Stitcher and things like that. Like these show notes, for instance, I use Overcast on iOS on my iPhone, and, you can go in, I can just swipe right in there, or swipe left, right, left, swipe left, and I can see a list of all the show notes. I can tap on the links. I can myself, and also it has like a chapter button so you can skip through something you're not interested in, like my long, boring intro. You can skip through that. So anyway, that's a benefit of using a specific podcast app, but is because with certain players like Spotify and like Stitcher, I do not get credit for those downloads if you listen through there. Again, if that's the best way and the only way, please listen to it that way. But if you can figure out another option, please do, because like I say, they download their own copy of my file of this MP3. And, they're basically just, and then when you play it through there, they see that you downloaded it, but my records don't record that it's been listened to again. So, if that was even 10, 15 listeners who listen, that's 10 or 15 downloads I wouldn't register. And I use those download numbers to charge my advertisers. So, it helps the show if you use an actual podcast app. That I did want to go into that a little bit because, like David was just saying, hey, can I just go listen to it on Spotify? Yes, you can, but please don't if you don't have to. Anywho, enough of that. Let's get back to the news. Continue on with some more COVID news. All right, this next story I also found on ttnews.com. That's Transport Topics. This one, well, honestly, it might be a little outdated on the numbers, but these were the last numbers. Is from May 8th, and it says trucking sheds 88,300 jobs in April. Wow, that's a lot. Apparently, these are not just trucking jobs, but also warehouse positions. That's nothing compared to the unemployment situation in the country right now. I think last numbers I saw was like 40 million or something like that were, out of a job. How ironic that this article comes right after my last, if truck driving is recession proof. But hey, I still stick by my original statement that truck driving is recession proof, but not necessarily your particular trucking job is recession proof. So anyway, if you're in show notes, that was Trucker Dump 143, the last episode. No, 144. Yeah, 144. So anyway, this article was saying that 88,000 jobs that we lost, we lost them in 1 month. And that was more than all of 2008, which was the last big crash we talked about, the Great Recession, 2008. So yeah, hitting us pretty hard, but some numbers are showing that we're coming back. Industries are getting back. Obviously, I'm back to work, so that shows that, businesses are reopening and things like that. So looking forward to things looking up. So anyway, if you're interested in all the unemployment gory details on this one, check out. This next article I'm going to need some help with, quite honestly. I need some owner-operators to write in and tell me what is going on here. I'm a little confused. Maybe I'm just a big dummy. Well, we all know I'm a big dummy, but this again is on overdriveonline.com. And it basically says that because of COVID-19, they did a bunch of surveys over here on Overdrive, and they, 88% funded were owner operators with their own authority, meaning they can book their own loads and things like that. Apparently, about a third of those owner operators with their own authority said they had totally shut down their businesses, and 50% were running far less than usual. Now, the idea behind this was they were saying that the rates were so low that they could not afford to operate their trucks at a loss. It was going to cost them more money to run that load, not run that load. Okay, here's where my business, I'm not a very smart businessman. Hopefully somebody can explain this to me, but I understand what they're doing. They're, fighting these low rates. These rates are just too low, and that's a smart thing in general, I think, to not, settle for freight that is paying less than what you actually make. You got to make a profit when you're running that truck. But here's the part I don't understand. Truck and you shut down completely. How does that help? I mean, yeah, you're not burning fuel costs and stuff like that, but you still have your truck payment, you still have your insurance payments, but you're not making any money. business sense here is probably lacking, but it seems like to me it would be better to make some money and only fall a little bit behind during, a trying time like this than it would be to actually just not work at all. If you're not working at all, you're probably sitting at home spending money like you normally do, but again, you're not making any. So, hey, like I said, I need some help from some owner-operators here. Write in, tell me the obvious thing I'm missing and why you won't slight loss other than on principle. I understand that. You don't need to write in and tell me about that. You're welcome to if you'd like, but you don't need to. I understand that aspect of it. But business-wise and money-wise, it just doesn't quite make sense to me. Dump@gmail.com. Let me know how that goes. And they've done some other surveys over here at overdriveonline.com when it comes to this COVID stuff and owner operators. So head on over to this article if you're more interested in that. There's a lot of changes in your business that you've done during coronavirus and things like that. So check that out. This next story actually surprised me. There's one aspect I didn't really think about. We all know that they have put out drivers, well, anybody really with a driver's license. If your driver's license needed to renew between a particular time, I don't remember what those dates are. Honestly, I should look that up, but I'm not going to. I reported on that in the last podcast. But anyway, we've all known that these DMVs are shut down. Oftentimes they're having you wait outside or set an appointment. It's just hard to get this stuff done. And, it's hard to get in to get a DOT physical, all that stuff. So they put out extensions. Well, one thing I didn't really think about was the CDL skills test. How are they going to do that? Well, this story on Transport Topics talks about that a little bit and how they are using technology now to do these tests. And basically, stuff, you can't be within 6 feet of another person, so it's dangerous for the driver and for the the instructor or the tester to sit over there in the passenger seat as he tells you to turn right or left or whatever. Is basically this one in particular they're talking about happened in Iowa, and basically the truck driver is driving, and then they have a trailing vehicle with the instructor in it, and they have doesn't really say what that device is, but I suppose it could be, just a cell phone, with a headset on or whatever, where you can talk to them and they can give you instructions. And if you have any questions about what they're asking you to do, you can clarify. Anyway, it sounds like a conversation, but they are following you and seeing how you're driving. I guess it makes sense. In a way, it makes more sense, because they can really pay attention, to like your lane position, things like that. But on the other hand, they can't sit there and watch you drive and see if you're checking your mirrors every 5 to 8 seconds or whatever, the number is you're supposed to do. I don't remember. It's been too long since my CDL test. I look at my mirrors, but, I just found this kind of interesting article, knowing that they are using technology in a way, to get people get new drivers their CDL skills tests done. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if they use this stuff in the future, because honestly, we don't really know what this coronavirus thing is going to do. There may be a new normal, so to speak, where, things have just changed, where a lot more people are ordering instead of going and sitting down. Although we went to Longhorn Steakhouse to pick up some shrimp dinners tonight, and out there in the carry out, and boy, you sure couldn't tell. It was packed. There were people just trying to. This is in Missouri, and they have opened things back up. We'll see how that goes. But anyway, this could be the new normal. It'd be interesting, if you have a CDL skills test coming up and your test goes right in, let me know. I think that'd be an interesting little thing to hear about. Technology. Gotta love it. Well, you don't have to, but you might as well embrace it, because it's coming whether you like it or not. Technology. Let's talk about 5G. This article I found on Transport Topics, ttnews.com. This talks about the future of 5G and what it holds for trucking. If you don't know what 5G is, it's just the newer network. It used to be Edge or whatever it was called on AT&T. Now it's 4G. Everybody knows about that. 4G is kind of the standard now. Took a while to get to that point, but it's kind of the standard now. Sure. Now, they point out in this article that it is going to be many, many years. They're thinking probably 10 years before this is completely rolled out and, where everybody will be switching from 4G over to 5G. I've heard lots of people say, 5G is going to be awesome. It's going to be so much faster and there's going to be more bandwidth and everything. And, I was just trying to think what really is going to be the benefit of this. I mean, if you're on your phone right now, anybody who has a smartphone or an iPad or anything like that, or your computer's running off the 4G network, it's pretty darn fast. You don't usually have to wait very long at all for a video to start, especially something like email or, that just flies through instantly, or social networking, uploading a picture, uploading a YouTube video is kind of slow sometimes, but downloading it is pretty fast. So it could get better, but I just didn't really see much of the benefit. But this article did point out some really neat areas that I had not really thought about. For instance, one good thing about the 5G network is that it will get rid of 3G networks eventually. They're actually saying the 3G networks are so totally on their way out, and you pretty well, if you're a fleet, you better be upgrading to 4G pretty quick. Now, the company I work for, we have OmniTrax logs, and I can tell you system, and it is much, much better than the 3G. Things, get updated faster. When we sign into our logs each day, it goes a lot faster, but it's still honestly kind of slow. I could this out quite a bit. If it was instantaneous, that would be awesome. But again, 5G is not everywhere. And just the nature of the infrastructure on this 5G thing is those towers have to be closer together. It's only in big, take a long time before we get this spread out across the nation to where we even have the coverage of 4G that we have on 4G now, or especially 3G, because 3G's everywhere. But again, they're getting rid of that kind of sun not too long down the pipeline here, and they're just going to be 4G. But anyway, here's an example of just a few of the things they mention in this article. Really neat article. You should check this one out. Link in the show notes. One of the things they suggest is that it's a lot faster. Maybe you could have multiple screens up at a time. Maybe you could have a wide view and a more closer view, so you can see where your turn is a lot easier. Maybe you could have a satellite view going while you have a normal view. And things like that. Now, honestly, the navigating in my current app in my phone that runs 4G is pretty darn fast. If I miss a turn or whatever, it recalculates pretty fast. But what they're saying is it will be even faster and more. Another thing that I really think that could be awesome about this is tracking trailer stuff. For instance, tracking, tire inflation on a trailer. They've got those little, Bluetooth devices on them now that can register, what the tire, whether the analog brakes are working. We already see that a lot in the computer systems in the truck. You could have a light out and your truck will tell you, hey, you got a light out and it's the right, on the front of the tractor. Okay, well, that's cool to know, but now it could shoot that message up into the cloud and, down to your company, and they would know about the same time you would know. That would be cool. That way, get that fixed and then there's no arguing with you about it. Also, another cool thing is the cargo status. I've always thought this was a neat concept, because anybody who's driven a truck for any length of time knows that one of the things that really sucks about trucking is trying to find an empty trailer when you need one. Well, how many times have you got told by a dispatcher, hey, go over to this customer, they've got an empty sitting over there where they've got 5 empties, and you go over there and they're not empty. I work for this large company, and they sent me to a Walmart distribution center, said we got about 30 empties over there. I went over there, checked every single one of them, all of them filled with pallets, and just junk and stuff like that. Basically, Walmart was using them for storage. And I asked them about it. So why do you guys tolerate that? And they said, they're Walmart. Okay, that makes sense. But you got 30 trailers sitting there that they think are actually, and they sent you there for nothing. So this kind of thing happens all the time. And with these systems on there, they've already got systems designed for trailers that can send out a signal, and they can actually in the truck or in the trailer and see if it's actually a loaded trailer or not. So that would be really handy. They could just look on their computer and say, we know for a fact this trailer is at this location and it is empty. Now, whether they give it, because we all know companies, many of these companies have a contract that say we need to keep 15 of your trailers on site or whatever. So, there's still that problem, but at least you're not going for an empty trailer that doesn't actually exist. And what a load off of us truckers, and not having to hunt down empties like that and drive around pointlessly. So that would be awesome. But not everything's awesome, of course, because everything comes with a catch too. They're also touting, I'm using air quotes there, benefits, is that they will be able to stream real-time video from our onboard cameras. Okay. All right. Well, you know how I feel about onboard cameras, those, especially the ones that point at the driver. But it's coming down the road. It's probably inevitable over time that every truck is going to have one of these. As bad as that sucks, it is what it is. But anyway, if you want to be streamed, if they want to see you picking your nose, that's great, isn't it? They can see all the gory details of what you pull out of there. So anyway, what else we got with this? Oh, one that was kind of hilarious and is never going to happen is they said, 5G radios are so good that they could actually make the truck itself a mobile hotspot. That is never going to happen. If a company who is trying to get drivers by attracting them with a mobile hotspot, because I just don't see trucking companies giving you a really easy way to watch YouTube while you're going down the road, to the dash and watch YouTube, flying down the road on their dime, no less, because these 5G networks aren't going to be cheap in the beginning either. So I just don't see that happen right away. If you want to watch Netflix, or your iPad or whatever, you're going to be doing it on your own dime. So don't count on that one. But when it comes to video, they are also saying that, you could watch in-cab videos better and things. Really had a company that implemented that very much, just a little bit. And it was kind of slow, but that was years ago. So I'm sure these 4G networks are much, much faster already. And you can watch a video, like a training video or something like that. If that's going to help that much. But, the point here is that it's coming. It's going to be cooler, but, the big thing is that these 4G devices are still going to be around for at least 10 years. But like I said, best case scenario, everybody to upgrade off those ancient 3G systems. They are slow, but they are very reliable. That's the thing. If you don't need much of a signal, like you remember the little escort device from Sid advertised on the show, that kind of a device doesn't need streaming video. It just needs a rock solid signal. And that's what 3G can provide. So hopefully 4G is in place to take care of all that. We'll see. Units like that, it's just nice to have a solid signal no matter where you go. Even if you can't get great internet, at least you can get a signal that can relate some sort of communication between two devices. So anyway, check out the link in the show notes if you're more interested in all that nerdy stuff. I like to think of myself as a pretty hip forward-thinking guy. My nephews, they disagree. But that's probably why I like the Volvo VNL series so much. They are so cool, sleek, and modern looking. Go to volvotrucks.us and check it out if you haven't seen them yet. But looks only go so far, and comfort is right. Like we've talked in the past about all the cool features in the cab, like the telescoping ladder that helps you get up in the top bunk, that nifty swiveling table, or the industry first reclining bunk. But there's also a way to help your fatigue when you're that's called Volvo Dynamic Steering. And having it eases stress on your back, arms, shoulders, and neck by making the steering easier. So basically, you could say that Volvo isn't a pain in the neck. See what I did there? Steering monitors your steering 2,000 times per second, and it makes small little adjustments for you. That helps to compensate for side winds, which would be so awesome if I had that in my truck, road vibrations, and it'll even help you with the steer tire. Just blows. Hey, see what I did there? Blows, blowout. Wow, I'm on a roll today. Seriously, though, you got to see the in-cab video to really believe this one. There's even a return to center. Not going to quite grasp unless you see the video. So, hey, do me a favor and go check out the VNL series with Volvo Dynamic Steering and enjoy driving again. You can learn more at volvotrucks.us, or I'm also notes to their YouTube channel, which has got some awesome videos of this stuff. Check it out. And hey, thanks to Volvo Trucks for sponsoring this episode of Trucker Dump. All right, let's move on with some good news. Well, most things, it's, sort of good, sort of bad, sort of not great. This is a series of articles I found over on overdriveonline.com. This is about the new hours of service that will be going into effect. Yes, the one episodes ago, I will put a link in the show notes. I don't remember the number of the podcast on that, but I went into detail about what each one of these new proposed hours of service rules means. And we actually got all of them. Now, one of these articles I mention in here has a really neat infographic that just really sums it up nice and easy on the 4 different rules that we got. I'll go through them real fast, but you should download this or keep this link handy on your phone in case you have any questions. I should also mention that one of these articles points out that they're speculating that these new September 29th of this year. Now, to my understanding, that's just a little over 2 years since they initially proposed everything and got this ball rolling. So that is pretty fast for the FMCSA to act on that and hold up to their promise of trying to push this thing through pretty quick. But again, let me run through these really fast. The best, of course, is the 30-minute break. We got that as advertised. So the old rule states 30-minute break. Well, I should say had to. They still have to until September. Anyway, drivers have to take a 30-minute break. Pardon me, a stupid 30-minute break in off-duty status within their first 8 on. Okay. Now the new rule, which is awesome, says drivers can take their 30-minute break in on-duty non-driving status within their first 8 hours of drive time. So what that means is that drive line is counted towards a break as long as it is continual. So for instance, if you do a drop and hook and it takes you 30 minutes or 32 minutes or whatever, that is considered a legal break, even though that is on duty. Say you pull into a truck stop and you fuel and it takes you 9 minutes. And then for 22 minutes, you are inside getting a drink, and that is off duty time. Fueling is on duty. That is considered a legal 30-minute break, which is great because, say you're sitting at a dock and they require you, your company requires you to log on duty while you're being loaded. Okay. Now 2 hours, and then they release you and you've got to take a 30-minute break and sit there another 30 minutes. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. You won't have to do that come September anymore. That, 30 minutes on duty line, sitting at a dock. As soon as you get loaded, you're out of there. Man, that'll be great. And also another great thing about this new 30-minute rule is that it starts when you start driving. If you go on duty and then you discover you got a flat tire or whatever, now you may be starting an hour and a half later where you're already into your 8 hours of on-duty time. Well, in the future, that will not be the case. You could go on tire fix for an hour and a half, and then your 8 hours starts when you actually drive, or start driving, I should say. Now, this is the way the 30-minute break should have been all along, because like I said in the previous podcast, or one of the previous, whichever one it was, this is the way that it should have been all along. This is the way it was designed to work. The whole idea was to keep us from driving for more than 8 hours straight. Now, it shouldn't have mattered if we were on duty or whatever, we were not staring at a road. So that should have counted in the past, but now they finally wisened up and we got that rule. That's great. The next rule that's changed is the off-duty split sleeper berth. Now they all break up their 10-hour off-duty period into 8-hour and a 2-hour split, with the shorter split counting against the 14-hour clock. Now, the big difference here is that not only can you do an 8 and a 2 split, but you can also do a 7 and a 3. Here's the kicker, and the awesome thing about this is neither shift counts against the 14-hour clock. So, you may remember from before that they had this 3-hour pause they were talking about doing. They were really trying to push this through, like, I spent 3 hours at a shipper. I can take those 3 hours and I can say, let's just move this all back. That doesn't count towards my 14. And basically you're working a 17-hour day. Okay. Now that's not ideal. I get it. There's a lot of people who are that shippers are going to abuse it. Trucking companies are going to abuse it with their dispatchers. And that's true. It will happen. Just stand up for yourself and don't let it happen. If you're tired, you're tired. Don't drive 17 hours, or you know what I mean? Don't work 17. But anyway, we did not get that 3-hour pause that we wanted. But what the FMCSA is saying is that this rule is basically the same thing. It accomplishes the exact same thing. And here's why. All right, let me sum up how this is actually going to work now. So say you are driving and you take 3 hours at the dock. Okay, you could actually drive after that time, and that doesn't go towards your 14. Okay. Take another 7-hour break later on, get your full 10 hours, and then just keep going. You can continue to do the split just like we always have. But now you can also just use that 3 hours as a pause. It's if you're starting you drive for a little bit, then you take a 3-hour break, it does not count towards your 14. Now, if you go ahead and drive however many more hours you have, and then you take a 10-hour break instead of a 7, now you're not anymore, but you just basically moved back your day 3 hours. So again, don't let yourself be talked into driving when you're not comfortable. If you didn't get any sleep during those 3 hours, or you're not ready of your actual 14, don't drive beyond that. But anyway, this new rule does kill two birds with one stone. So it's kind of clever the way they did that. Probably be confusing as I'll get out to anybody doing it for a while. Be good long-term, like I said, provided you don't let yourself be pushed around. The third rule pertains to adverse conditions. The old rule says that drivers can add 2 hours to their 11-hour drive time, but not their 14 hours. So if you're in inclement weather or whatever, and you need an extra 2 hours, you could drive up to 13 hours, but that's as long as you didn't go over your 14-hour clock. Well, the new rule adds 2 hours to both their 11-hour clocks and their clock. So basically, if you run into adverse conditions like traffic or weather or anything like that, you can have 13 hours of drive time and 16 hours of on duty. Now, I don't see any specifics in this, but I'd be willing to bet there are some restrictions on that. Be very careful about using that, especially, like I think there's guidelines like, if you knew there was a traffic jam before you took off, or you running in with, blizzard or whatever, well, that's not going to count because they're going to go, hey, you knew that was coming and you took off into that kind of weather anyway. So anyway, be careful using that, but it's there if you. Last one is the short haul exemption. Now, the old rule states that any driver operating within 100 air miles of their home base, they are not required to keep records of duty status, and they have a 12-hour. The new rule says they have 150 air miles, so you can go out further from your home base, and they are not required to keep a record of duty status also still, and they are on duty limit now. So it gives them a little bit more time. And quite honestly, it makes a lot more sense because if a road driver has 14 hours to work, why doesn't a local driver? Interesting. I never quite understood that one, but there it is. I said, go over here, download, there'll be a link in the show notes. You'll see it for this infographic, and download it. It's really handy, really straightforward, and just tells you exactly what you need to know in case that way you're not confused down the road. 28th, I believe, is the day they're shooting for. I'll keep you posted on that, obviously, as we go forward. All right, next up, have you heard all the hubbub about the brokerage? Everybody being pissed off at the brokers? Well, been all that loved, quite honestly, in the trucking industry, but they're really going after them now. Basically, what they're saying is that freight brokers are gouging prices, they're having predatory practices during this COVID stuff. The protests in Washington have been about recently, and that President Trump has actually taken a notice of is them the truckers trying to say that, hey, it should be transparent. We should know what being paid for that load, what the shipper is actually paying, and they're saying that's our right to know that. That way the broker can't pull the wool over our eyes and tell us they're getting paid less than they actually are. Well, apparently didn't even know. I think Overdrive Online did a survey about this and said that most people don't even know about it, which is odd. But anyway, I found this article on Truckers Report. That's thetruckersreport.com. This article says that this is already allowable by the federal rules, according to 49 CFR 371.3. By the way, honestly, I've always heard, 49 CFR and didn't really know what it meant. It stands for Code of Federal Regulations, and the 49 is for Title 49. Apparently there's 50 of these Code of Federal Regulations and with the transportation industry. So there you go. Learned something today. Anyway, according to this 371.3, carriers and drivers are allowed to know how much the shipper is paying for that. They are allowed. The problem here is that a lot of freight brokers write into their contracts that they are not allowed to ask, and that the driver or the trucking company is not allowed to, they're waiving the actual cost of that load is. So who's to blame here? I mean, people are reading these contracts, are clearly not reading these contracts, and they are signing that saying, yeah, I'll take this load. And then later they're complaining saying the actual amount of that load. Well, apparently you have every right, according to this federal rule, that you have every right to know how much that load was paying from the shipper and how much their cut was. Now, I'm a little confused on this. Again, I'm going to need some help from owner operators who actually book loads through freight brokers and stuff, but I have mixed feelings on this. This is probably not going to be a popular opinion, but you can tell me where here. All right. Truckers want to know how much know how much they're paying to get that load covered. I understand that. But how many other industries do that? For instance, like they have to tell the customer how much, it costs to ship you. They can charge anything they want. They can charge a low rate. They can charge a high rate depending on availability. Nobody says anything about that. Your plumber comes by and he's fixing your toilet. He doesn't have to tell you what his costs are and, how much it's going to cost him. He just charges you whatever he feels is fair. He's probably already got in his business plan that, a 10, 20, 30% profit, whatever, over what it's going to cost me. Same way with like an auto mechanic. You take it in, they know how much those parts cost. They know how long it's going to take them. They can just name a price. It's fair and you're going to pay for it or you're not. So I don't really see, maybe it has something to do with international, commerce and why this is different, but I don't see that much of a difference. So again, please, I'm showing owner operators, write me truckerdump@gmail.com and tell me what's the difference? Just tell me what the difference is. And, if it's a good explanation, I'll explain it on the next podcast. So I'm a little lost on this one, why all the owner operators think they have the right to know this amount. I mean, look at it from the other point of view. I understand freight brokers can be a little crooked, but if I owned a business, I don't have the ability to say, hey, I'm getting charged this amount, but I'm charging you. Because now, anytime you put it like that, the person who's getting charged is going to be pissed. They're going to be like, well, why do you get all this markup? Well, they don't understand. I've got bills to pay. Nobody operates a business at a loss. Clearly we just heard about the owner operators who's shutting down their business, so they wouldn't operate in a loss. So I'm just confused. Help me out here, folks. I need some help. Anyway, let's move on. Oh, wait. Hang on. Let me slow down. Sometimes I forget that there are non-truckers who listen to this podcast, and sometimes I forget to explain myself. Maybe you can guess what a freight broker does. Maybe you can't. Now, again, I'm not an owner-operator. I'm just speaking from what I've learned. But basically, shippers have loads they need to ship. Sometimes they contact a trucking company directly and get, a truck. Sometimes it's just too much of a hassle, or they can't get a load covered or whatever, and they will give it to a specialized person who is a freight broker, and they have their own contacts, and you can go to them. Truckers can go to them and find loads, often based, the smaller ones are, they might operate in a particular area. So if you know who runs, who has good loads in that area, you can call them directly and say, hey, you got anything? I need to leave, within the next 3 hours. You got anything? And they can quote, making a little bit of profit on that. That's pretty much about the extent of what I know about freight brokering. But one thing I do know is that anytime a big business gets involved in something, well, watch out, because Amazon is getting into the brokerage business. There's been a lot of crap going around about Amazon and the way they're treating drivers when they show up, leaving loads, loading them for, a couple days or whatever. I think they're getting better at that, but there's still some issues going on. Well, I'm not going to go into great detail here, but if you are an owner operator, you probably want to check out this article that I found on overdriveonline.com. Obviously. And it's basically just saying that Amazon is getting involved in this, not just for their own freight is the important thing, not just to get their loads covered, but also to, they're trying to get into like the small and medium sized, trucking, covering those kind of loads for medium and small, trucking company sizes. Wow, I'm spitting all over myself here, but like I said, I don't know a lot about this, but anytime somebody as big as Amazon wants to put their nose in it, it's probably not a good thing. I'm not going to say that for sure, but like I warned a similar thing about Uber, will they drive prices down? I don't know. That's kind of the way Amazon operates. They just, they do shady things sometimes. Like this article points out that at one point they took a loss in diaper sales just to drive a competitor out of business. Diapers.com was around and they just couldn't compete with Amazon anymore. And so they shut down the business. Guess what? Amazon goes and buys diapers.com. Walmart does this kind of stuff too. Lots of big companies do it. It's shady, yes, but this is the kind of thing you're looking at. So I'm just warning you, be prepared. Amazon in the freight brokering business. Ouch. All right, let's move on and talk about some electric vehicles. I don't believe we've talked about those in quite a while. Well, these are actually a couple of pretty good articles, especially this first one here on Transport Topics. Link in the show notes. And the first one talks about the challenges fleets are having with electronic vehicles. Now we know there are some issues, of course, but, cost being one of them, infrastructure being charging stations and stuff like that. But there's some other issues too. But they say a lot of these problems are being overcome. For instance, the cost of electronic vehicles in trucks was a major ordeal. I can't remember said to have cost. It was going to be like $300,000 or something like that. And that's just crazy. I mean, that's nuts. But they say the cost of electronic vehicles, mainly the battery, has declined as much as 8 years. That's pretty good. And that's expected to drop an additional 50% over the next decade. So they're saying that's going to put the actual cost of owning an electronic vehicle, or buying one, I should say, the upfront costs of a diesel counterpart by the year 2030. So that's interesting. If that actually happens, that would make electronic trucks even, more of a good thing, more of an easy buy for trucking companies. For instance, they've got to figure out how to handle the charging. The charging for these things, these batteries are huge, as you can imagine, and it takes a while for them to charge. Well, they're going to have to overnight somewhere, charging. Most truck drivers are at a truck stop all night. What do they do about that? Are there going to be charging stations? I mean, that's a lot of charging stations to put in, to cover every truck in America, or even 50% of trucks in America. How are you going to find one of those spots that has an electric charger overnight? Because this isn't just like your little 110, plug you plug in at your house. Actual big charger, and that's the only way you're going to get these things up and running. Plus, there's the fact that a lot of fleets operate where a city driver drives that truck during the day, and then at night a road driver takes it, and then back and forth, and never setting for very long. So it's completely unviable for those kind of companies. So there are issues like that to work around. But one thing that just drives me freaking crazy about this is everybody's like, ooh, electric vehicle, it's going to be no emissions. Okay, that's fine. But where do they think they're getting that electric from? Probably coal burning, coal burning plants, probably producing that electricity. Now, not everyone, obviously. The vast majority here in the country, the way I understand it, is still coal burning. So we're still kicking out emissions to cover these electric vehicles. But, one thing that does drive me completely crazy about this is, of course, California is pushing this the hardest. Here's what the California Air Resources Board, you probably know as CARB, here's what they have to say about it. They want to see 4,000 zero-emission trucks on the state's road by the end of 2024. 4,000 trucks isn't a lot. And, maybe they could get a lot of those taken care of, like in San Francisco or in LA area, things like that, and get a lot of those covered, to reach their goal. Also, they want to require 5% of the new tractors that are made, that's class 7 and 8, the big ones, by the end of 2024. 5% of them. 9% of the smaller vehicles that are class 4 through 8, like straight trucks. So basically they're saying that adds up to about 30% of class 7 and 8 tractor sales and 50% of class truck sales by the end of 2030. Man, that's a big goal to set. 50% of the straight trucks to be electronic by that point. I realize that's 10 years down the road, but man, that is a lot considering we don't have the to charge these vehicles. And also the fact that I think California keeps forgetting that they suck. They are a horrible state. They have shut down. I don't know if they forgot this, but this past, they were telling regular people who live at home, in their homes, don't use electricity this day. We're going to cut you off completely because we don't have enough to go around. Well, how do they think they're going to power all this stuff? I don't get it. Anyway, California has always confused me. But anyway, let's move on to this next article, which is all about charging. There is a company called Startup Amply Power that has raised $13.2 from some investors to work on infrastructure for these electronic charging stations. Now, that's certainly going to be needed, but it's good to know investing in this. But man, they've got a big chore ahead of them to get this across the country. Just a huge infrastructure problem. There's a gas station or there's a truck stop around every corner. None of them that I know of have any way to charge a truck electronically. By having this done by, 2030 or whatever, just seems almost impossible. But I guess, and there are people investing money in it, of course, because they see potential in it. We will see. We'll keep an eye on that, of course. I would have sworn that we covered this next topic, but I cannot find it anywhere. So if we did, then please pardon. But this is about the CSA, which is the Compliance Safety Administration or whatever it is, accountability, whatever it's I can't even remember. When I wrote the article and did the podcast about it, I called it the crappy, sucky administration. But anyway, it's basically a way to track carriers and drivers and give them a rating based on their safety record. What was that a lot of non-preventable accidents were counted against your safety record. Now, for those of you who don't know, maybe some of you non-truckers, probably most truckers know this, but there are, it's preventable. It's somebody's fault. Accidents are always one of the other's fault, usually. But there's also preventable or non-preventable. And for, it's saying, well, there was an accident, but it been doing this instead of this. So there is that to judge by too. And they were basically saying, even though a trucker might be in a crash and they were saying, hey, it was non-preventable, you couldn't have done anything about it, that score was still, and that made no freaking sense whatsoever. Well, the FMCSA has come around on this and they have changed that to where, man, I know I've talked about this in the past, but I couldn't find. They have changed that to where if the accident was preventable, you can, it won't count against your safety score. But if that has happened in the past, you will probably have to petition to get that removed. Here in the truckersreport.com, it talks about how you might be surprised what's considered preventable. Now, if you want to follow along, I've included a link in the show notes that'll crash eligibility guide or something like that. Can't remember what I call it. Something like that. Anyway, it's in the show notes. And there's a bunch of examples of things that you might be surprised are considered non-preventable and from your record. And some of these are very shocking. Like, for instance, if a car is traveling behind you, obviously they hit you in the rear. Obviously, it is not your fault. It's non-preventable. It will not go on your record from now on. But if there's a car that is riding along your left side, your driver's side, and they start to come into your lane and they hit the side of your truck, accident is preventable or not is based on kind of the angle where they hit you. If it's a slight angle, I guess it's going to be considered your fault somehow. Or not your considered preventable. That makes no freaking sense to me whatsoever. Again, there's some really good images in here. Some of those, what they call struck in the rear examples are, non-preventable. Some of them are preventable based on the angle that the car hits you, which again makes no sense to me because you're traveling down the road in your lane and somebody swerves into your lane, hits you. How can that be your problem? Anyway, another example is like a car crosses into your lane, hits you head on, obviously non-preventable for the trucker. Also, if they cross the median, but here's the kicker. They've got to be completely in your lane. If they're only partially in your lane, even if they've come off, could be your fault. I don't know how they get that, but I guess they're thinking you should have moved over and given them that extra 3 feet of your lane that they wanted. I really don't understand this. There are some really examples here, like if you're going through a light and a car comes at you from the side and they hit you, I think this has honestly always been considered preventable. He knows that even though you have the green light, it doesn't mean that you are officially allowed to enter that intersection. You are still supposed to look both ways, make sure nobody's coming. No trucker does that. No anybody does that, car driver or whatever, green light, I'm going. If a car was to strike you in the side and they were still in their lane, even if they were running a red, you could still be charged as a preventable accident. Nuts. It's always been that way. I talk about arguing with my instructor in school when I first started about this. They gave us this example and I was like, you're nuts. But she proved to us that it was that it was considered a preventable accident, even though it's insane. Another example would be like if, left and they lose control and spin out and you hit them, not eligible. That one kind of surprised me actually, because I had this exact scenario happen to me on one of my non-preventable accidents. Lady was come over in my lane. She lost control at the last second, realized I was there and swerved too hard, did a fishtail right in front of me and I ran over the front of her Saturn. And, trooper got there and he said, not your problem. It was all on her. Another example I found interesting was, of course, it's not your fault if a car tries to sneak up on your right-hand side while you're making a right-hand turn. That's all on the car. But if they're trying to make a facing you and they're going to turn after you go by and they turn too soon, run into the side of your truck, guess what? That's preventable. Somehow. Don't know how, but that's preventable. Anyway, just bizarre, some of these examples. So a PDF, you can also just look at it online. Bizarre. Just another way the trucker gets screwed. All right, here's an interesting one that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. These good trucking law articles by overdriveonline.com. Well, this one is about when meds can sideline your commercial driving. So this one's all about the medications drivers can and can't. Or, lots of, I'm not going to go into this a lot because quite honestly, I can't pronounce most of the things in here. These drug names are freaking nuts. But, there are, some lists of things you absolutely cannot take. Apparently some narcotics are actually allowed under doctor supervision. Who would know? I guess the one thing I found interesting is the drug, what's it's called Chantix, which is You quit smoking. That used to be banned, but it's not anymore. Didn't know that. Wonder how many drivers actually knew were taking that and actually were doing it illegally while they were driving. Also, some sleep and Linestra, they used to be banned also, but now they are allowing them if you allow yourself enough time to let them wear off before you drive again. So, again, if you take medication and you are a trucker, this article, it's a pretty good one. It's written by, or I don't know if it's written by him. No, it's not written by him, but it was consulted through Dr. Alexander E. Underwood. He works at the KT Health Clinic. I'm going to give you a phone number here and an email address. So be prepared for that, or just look in the link in the show notes. The link in the show notes will go directly to his mail, or call this number directly if you tap on the link. 417-832-8678. And his email address is mail@kthealthclinic.com. And again, this is Underwood, says you can reach him for questions. Again, find all that in the show notes. And you know what? After this next article that's coming up, I kind of need some meds myself, because this really kind of... We've all heard the story of Arrow Trucking Company going out of business in grand fashion, where they just shut the doors and left drivers stranded, hundreds of drivers all over the country with no way to get home, 3 days in 2009. Bad situation. Well, the former CEO of that went to jail. His name is James Douglas, or Doug Pilesticker, I think is his name. What a horrible name. He deserves that name. He is now free from prison after serving just half of his sentence. Yes, you heard that right. He did appeal for a quote unquote compassionate release. I don't know what that is. Sorry for him for breaking the law. You should get out of prison. I don't know what that means. But anyway, he was denied that, thank God. But they are going to let him serve the rest of his sentence in the comfort of his own home, thanks to the coronavirus. Apparently, he had originally been sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, but again, that got cut in half. The only good news of this is he was ordered to pay $22 million, and he still owes that money. Not that I can see how he's he doesn't have a job anymore, and he's confined to home. Oh well. Criminals are criminals. Maybe he'll figure out a way. Anyway, that one just kind of made me angry. So, try not to take any drugs if it made you angry. I'll try not. How about something else to make you a little bit angry? How about tolls? We all love tolls, right? Well, New Jersey, everybody's favorite state, right? Raising their tolls up to 36%. Yeah, as if it wasn't expensive enough. Apparently, those tolls are going to rise 36% on the turnpike and, also on the parkways and the expressways, but I don't believe. Anyway, so doesn't really matter that much. Anyway, it's generally 36%. Lovely. Isn't that great? Just what truckers need, more ways to spend their money. Thanks, New Jersey. All right. 2 stories, that is, unless, some breaking news comes out about the coronavirus disappearing from the face of the planet all of a sudden in one day. Let's not count on that, though. Let's count on 2 more stories. Positives and, possibly some negatives depending on your view. This one is all about Travel Centers of America, and they are beginning to reopen some of their dine-in restaurants. We all know, not me as much as you, the past 5 weeks, but I'm hearing from a lot of my coworkers who are still working that it is extremely hard to get meals, and it is getting extremely frustrating never being able to go in and actually sit down and get out of the truck for a little bit. This hopefully will help. They are going to be reopening some of those restaurants, not all of them. And of course, like we said earlier, the coronavirus could possibly be long-term changes happening, and they're saying the salad bar and the buffet features, they won't be coming back anytime soon, at least not in the initial opening. They might do it later, but it could just be the fact that those are gone for good. Salad bar and buffet gone. Say those 2,900 employees that we reported on in the last podcast, that were laid off or furloughed, many of them will probably not be coming back, which is sad. Hope they find new jobs soon. A lot of financial stuff in this article, but here's the thing I found at the bottom that I was like, well, this could be bad, this could be good, all depending on your look of it. Apparently, cutting spending, laying off workers, all this corona stuff, and, they're not making as much money and everything has caused them to delay a plan that they had. It was a 1-year plan, and they were planning to convert Skillets and Quaker State Lube restaurants to International House of Pancakes, the IHOPs. I didn't know this was going to take place. Maybe you did because you go to Petros and TAs more than I do. I don't know. If people do not like how all of these independent truck stop restaurants have gone to chains, it is what it is. Nothing we can really do about it. Either we eat there or we don't. But apparently they are going to be delayed. They were planning on doing, but apparently way back in 2019, TA had agreed to remake 94 of its restaurants into IHOPs over the next 5 years. So going to happen, I guess we will see. But for now, if you enjoy your iron skillet and your Quaker steak and lubes, you better get in there and chow down while you can. So like I said, good news and bad news. Government needs your help. Found this one on ttnews.com, which again is Transport Topics. Check out the link in the show notes for more information. I will also include a link to this survey. What survey am I talking about? Well, Northeast. There is a parking problem. We're all aware of it. It's been that way for a long time. And they are taking a survey, asking you some questions about it, trying to get a general idea of what's going on up there and trying to fix the problem and figure out what need to do. If you remember right, in the last podcast or maybe the one before, we reported about, what was it, $755 million. It was a pretty good chunk of change that the government had donated towards, or not donated, but, earmarked for truck parking specifically. So they are planning on doing some good things for trucking industry and for truck parking, but they're going to need your help in what really. Again, there's a link to this survey and this article, both in the show notes. Check that out. They say the survey only takes about 5 minutes. If you remember right, not too long ago, I don't know, maybe 6 months, maybe, talking about how this was taking place out in the Midwest, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, I think Wisconsin was part of it. There was a bunch of states that were doing a similar survey and working on some truck parking issues up there. That today, you can go through there and, see the rest area signs out on the interstate before you get there that say, hey, there's, 13 spots available in here or whatever. It's kind of handy. I've found that to be somewhat accurate sometimes. But, hey, at least they're trying to do something. So if you want to be a part of this and you find yourself battling with truck parking issues in the Northeast all the time, which I know you are, if you stay on the road, I know you are. One of the things I love about my new job is I don't really go up there at all anymore. Thank God for that. So anyway, if you want to be a part of the solution and not the problem, head on over and take this survey. The news, if you've got anything in the news that you're interested in that I am not covering, I would be interested to hear what that would be. I'm not really interested in freight rates and all that kind of stuff because it's to the average company driver. They don't really care. I realize I have owner operators who listen to this show too. I do appreciate it, but I don't know a lot about that. If you want to hear that kind of information, I assume I wanted it, but I'm not sure the vast majority of the audience would be interested in it. And I'm assuming you're probably getting that information from some trucking podcast that actually has an owner operator who knows what he's talking about. Stupid company driver like myself. So anyway, if there is something that I am not covering or something you'd like to hear more about, or you just have suggestions or anything for the show, comments, suggestions, tips, whatever, get dump@gmail.com. And of course, that email address will be at the bottom of the show notes where it always is, and possibly about 8 million other places within the show notes. All right, before we get on to the main topic, why don't we take a second to thank our sponsor? Hey, Pilot Flying J is back for a special shout out to you, the professional driver, as you keep plugging away during this challenging time. You're keeping America rolling, and they appreciate it, as do I. They want to give you more rewards and more points. The program is called Push for Points, and it can get you up to that 4 points per gallon level faster than you've ever done before. You can reach it after only 6 qualifiers. But hey, this nifty Push for Points thing is only for a limited time, and it's only found in the Pilot Flying J app. So that means if you don't already have the app on your phone, you need to head over to pilotflyingj.com/app, Android or iPhone apps. And hey, it is super easy to get Push for Points started. I just now opened the app and a little notice popped up that said, hey, would you like to get Push for Points started? Well, yes, I would. Thank you. So really, the activate button at the beginning of each month. Then just fill your tank as you normally would, making sure you put at least 75 gallons in. Then you can just sit back and grin as you watch your balance grow higher and higher. Everyone knows you normally earn, but hey, you'll be earning 2 points per gallon after just 2 qualifying fills. After 3 fills, 2.5 points. 4 fills, 3 points. 5 fills get you 3.5 points. And finally, after your 6th qualifying fill, you'll be per gallon for the whole rest of the month. That's going to rack up fast. And of course, these points are basically money. So you can use them for food or drinks or lots of merchandise in the store, or stuff for your rig. You can even use it, or you can reserve a parking spot with it. How cool is that? I mean, come on, driver. If you aren't taking advantage of what is clearly just free money, well, you're a nut job. My words, not Pilot Flying J's. Pilot Flying J wants to thank you for what you do out there on the road. For terms and conditions and to download the app, go to pilotflyingj.com/app. And if you're really nice, you can save up all those points and buy me some nice. Or not. Thanks to Pilot Flying J for sponsoring this episode of Trucker Dump. Well, we are officially 1 hour and 18 minutes into the show, and we have topic, which is a really long interview. So, it's very interesting. I hope you'll find it as fun as I did. But, I've been trying to interview people with unique trucking jobs, be interested in, and, just give you an idea what it's all about. And we've got one of those today about overweight, oversize loads. But before that, I got a bit of a disclaimer here. I learned a valuable lesson, and I know when I talk about my sound quality, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's my stinking show. Anyway, I learned a valuable lesson today, a lesson I've known all along, and that lesson is always listen to your headphones as you record, because when you don't, your microphone stand bumps up against your table and it makes loud thumping noises through the entire interview. Yeah, well, that happened to me while recording this episode. Some thumps, weird sounds here and then, possibly. Maybe you won't, but I have gone to great pains to get rid of it all, and this was a mega episode anyway, and it took me forever to edit. well over 12 hours. Yes, that's just the editing. That does not count the pre-show prep and the recording and the publishing. While I do love doing this show, it is shows like this with my error that make me second guess what the heck I'm doing here with this podcast. Ugh. So even if you can't hear the sounds, chalk that up to me being an awesome editor and not that your ears suck. Anyway, let's get on with this interview with Travis Jellison. All right, on today's show, we have... And welcome to the show, Travis.
Hello, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I've been pumped to talk to you. I reached out to you about this interview a long time ago, but we're just now getting around to doing it. I guess that's my procrastination right there.
Well, we're all busy sometimes, right?
Okay, if I haven't already mentioned it in the podcast so far, which I probably have, but if I haven't, Travis does heavy haul stuff. Is that what we call it? Heavy haul? What are you calling it?
I call it overdimensional. I do both heavy, wide, high, and long. So to me, it's just anything overdimensional.
Okay, all right. So what was the last load that you hauled, and where'd you go with it?
So the actual last load I hauled was a legal load, was a refrigerated load to Alaska and back. And that's one of the things with the company I currently work for. I am not necessarily tied to one piece of equipment at all times. Mm-hmm. But so that was just a normal, and it's just because right now with the way freight is, with all the different lockdowns and shutdowns, the type of freight I normally haul has slowed down tremendously. Yeah. And so we're a very diverse company, and he had an opportunity to, make money. So I went to Alaska. But my last overdimensional load was a big front end wheel loader. Okay. And it was, they have to disassemble those to some degree to get them as small and compact as they can. So the front forks were missing off of it, the cab on the top to get it down under legal height, but it was still 13 wide. The machine itself weighed about 95,000 pounds, so it made my total gross weight right at 170. I think I was about 173 total gross weight. Wow.
Yeah, and all the way to Alaska. No, that one didn't go to Alaska. You're referring
correct.
To Alaska.
Yeah, no, that was we don't run the overdimensional stuff up into Alaska very often. Yeah. The company has. I personally haven't. Typically, it's too expensive, and so they'll put that kind of stuff on a barge and take it by water to a port in Alaska, and then finish the trip by truck. It's just just from Seattle to Anchorage is right at 2,500 miles. So a load like that would just, between all the permits and pilot cars and stuff, it'd be pretty expensive. So it's cheaper just to throw it on a boat and, get the majority of the trip done that way. But the load I was just talking about, I just took from, it was Southern Oregon down into Northern Arizona. So not a huge trip, but, still took, I think ended up taking me about 5 days to make the trip. And a lot of that's just because you're really limited on how far you can travel per day and stuff because of the permits.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I have done, I think, one or two I'm using air quotes here, oversized loads. And they make trailers in Indiana, but you can't haul them through Illinois, like at night. So you have to put like a marker on it and, like flashing lights and flags and everything on it. And you can only drive, from, and that kind of a thing, even though I've never quite understood that because they specify what route you take. So do the overpasses shrink at night or what, what's the thought on that? I mean, why can't, I understand why you can't run at night because your loads are huge and that would be a hazard, but something that's just 6 inches taller than the average trailer makes no sense to me whatsoever. But anyway.
And I agree with you because I've had those same kind of loads. And I think some of that is just, they at some point they have to make a regulation that they, so they said at this height, we don't want anything running at night. And so, Yeah, 14 might be fine, but with 14.6, and so somebody's going to always push that envelope. So they just probably picked the number and said, that's it. But you're right. And then the only other logic would be is maybe, because you can never trust a permit. And if you ever read a permit completely, which, very few drivers ever do, a lot of them are pretty detailed.
Yeah.
But it will always say that all responsibility falls on the driver.
Of course it does.
Right. And so even though a permit tells you to go this route, in the fine print, the state will openly admit, we do not guarantee that this route will work. That's just the route they tell you to take. So it's your responsibility. So I guess at night, you might not see a low-hanging power line, or you might not see a structure, potentially the height of it. That's my only conclusion after all the years of doing this, that's why they don't allow tall loads to run at night. The width and all those other stuff makes sense, like you said, because, once you get so big, it's just an added safety problem to try and do that at night. But yeah, height, I guess that's the only thing I can think of is since they don't guarantee the route, you may or may not see, think about it. It's possible that a power pole could shift and you could have a power line hanging down 2 inches lower than when they surveyed the route 10 years ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. It's all just legal red tape anyway. But
Yep.
I mean, part of it is for safety, especially with these great big ones. But what exactly does qualify for a oversized load? I'm obviously being anything over 13.6, I have learned from my 14-foot trailers. But what about width and length and, what's the limits on that stuff before it's considered heavy haul?
Every state's a little different, but as a general rule, most of the time, like you said, 13.6 is legal height. But like out west where I'm at, 14 foot is. Mm-hmm. So, just really, you have to know your regions. 8'6" is legal width, anything over 8'6", and that is standard across every state. So anytime you're over 8'6", you're considered oversized. And then length, that's a tricky one, and that is literally different state by state. So, and it also depends on, are we talking complete overall length of the vehicle or just length of load, and how much overhang the load has off of the trailer or in front of the trailer. And so that's where, and to be honest with you, I don't have any of that kind of stuff memorized. We use a service, and we just give our dimensions to the service, and they pull the permits for each and every state that we're going to travel through, and and verify the information that way. The length is the trickiest one, in my experience, has been the trickiest one to even try and understand or figure out, because every state is different. It's never been an issue that I couldn't get a permit to do my whole route, but when you look at it, some states might allow you to be 130 feet long, others might only allow you to be 110, and then it depends what roads you're on, if you're on an interstate or a U.S. highway. So that's a tough one to try and memorize, you know what I mean? But the width is pretty standard across the United States. So if you're staying on the interstate system, anything over 8'6" up to 10 foot is what they would be an oversized overwidth load. You have to have a permit for. And in most on the interstate systems, as far as I know, pretty much in the whole United States, that size load, anything under 10 foot, can run 24/7. At night, you would have to have lights on the four corners of the load, in addition to your normal flags and signage, but you could drive at night with that load.
So there are oversized loads that are allowed to be hauled at night. I thought that was just a general thing.
Oh, no. Yeah, so like I said, anything under 10 foot can on the interstate system. Okay. Now, if you're on state highways or U.S. highways, 2-lane highways, those kind of things, now you're dealing with every state kind of has their own rules and regulations. But, like I said, as long as it's lit up and all that, you're as far as I know, every state I've ever been, you're fine up to 10 foot. Then from 10, and it's pretty much 2 foot increments. So then from 10 foot to 12 foot, it starts to get gray. Some states it's okay, some states it isn't. So I always just figure if I'm over 10 wide, I'm not going to run at night. You know what I mean? Because you might be able to in one state, but not the next state. So you just figure you're not going to.
And like you said, it all falls down on the driver. So you've got to make them sorry.
Right. Yeah. And then what it is some states you can run at night with a pilot car. but without a pilot car, you can't run. So you'll see loads. I know out here out west, a lot of times in Oregon, you'll see guys, they'll use a pilot car so they can get an earlier start, especially in the wintertime because we're limited. We have such a short, period of daylight.
Sure, yeah.
So they'll start 2 or 3 hours early with a pilot car, and it's typically local guys that probably have their own pilot car, so it's not like a huge extra expense for them. Yeah. And that way they can get down the road and get into the daylight hours and then make their delivery on time or get to whatever job site they're trying to get to.
Right.
And then once you get over 12 foot, I think 12 to 14 foot, I don't think anybody would let you run at night, even with a pilot car. Now you're just getting too big. And then you're probably going to need a pilot car in most areas, even in the daytime. And then what's really weird is once you get real big, I did a bunch of moves last summer that were 21 feet wide. Those were only at night. We weren't allowed to move them in the daytime at all. And that's what they call a super load. And that's police escorts, and they shut down highways. And so that was we had a special permit that we were only allowed to operate for 6 hours. And that was a pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure they do that at night because there's just less traffic, especially if you have to go through a major city or something like that.
That's exactly what it is. Less traffic. And since they do require routes to be shut down, it's much safer.
Less angry four-wheelers because the road's shut down.
Right. Well, you want to know what's funny is, so there was 3 of us. We convoyed on this particular move, and we had each truck had 3 pilot cars, so we had 9 pilot cars, and then we had 8 police escorts.
Wow!
And so they're leapfrogging. They're running ahead of us to stop traffic or close intersections or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then as we pass them, they leapfrog. And there were still people. This is like 3:00 in the morning on I-5 that were trying to go around from behind us, trying to pass us. We had all 4 lanes of I-5 shut down like a rolling blockade.
Uh-huh.
And they're trying to squeeze through the police and pilot cars to get in front of us.
Oh, my God.
So, yeah, it just goes to show people, they're just oblivious. They don't care.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, explain to the non-trucker who might be listening, what is a pilot car and what is the purpose of the pilot car?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so your pilot car or escort, just depends on what terminology you want to use, is just a regular vehicle that will have flashing lights, amber lights on it, and has signage on it, kind of like the truck would have, that will say oversized load. Mm-hmm. Has to be visible both from the front and rear. And then it's literally just an escort for the load. It's to give advance warning to the public that something is coming their way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So a lot of times where you need a pilot car is on 2-lane roads, and you'll have what they call a front escort, somebody that runs ahead of you to let oncoming traffic know that they're about to meet something that may be in their lane. Mm-hmm. Then there's other times, like on the interstate, it'll be a rear pilot car. So now you're 2 or more lanes traveling one direction. You're obviously not going to meet anybody, but they want people that are passing to know, hey, up ahead of you, there might be something blocking 2 lanes. So it's just an extra way to warn the public that there's, a large movement, a large vehicle, possibly slow. That's usually my dilemma I'm in, because I'm usually so heavy that I'll be a very slow moving vehicle up ahead. So a lot of times I have to have a rear escort just strictly because of my weight, because I'm going to be so slow. Mm-hmm. And they want to give, the motoring public as much advance notice. But it's just, probably everybody's seen one at one point, in their driving lifetime. It's just a regular car that's got, typically amber flashing lights on it and a sign somewhere. And I think they're also required to have 2 flags on each side, one on each side of the vehicle, to try and catch their attention. And those drivers have their whole set of rules and regulations and training that they had to go through. So it's not just an average person that can jump in a car and put a sign on it. They actually have to be certified in every state that they operate in. And they have to carry that with them. So if a cop or a DOT person stopped them, they'd have to be able to prove that they're certified. And so they have a whole different set of rules and regulations they follow in conjunction with following the same rules that the driver of the load has to follow.
Yeah. I've noticed some of the, especially that lead one out there will often have a huge pole sticking straight up in the air to gauge height to make sure, if they can fit under it without smashing that pole, then you're going to fit it. Purpose up there.
Correct. And that's referred to as a pole car. And so you're right. Their sole purpose is to check bridge heights ahead of the load. And we've all seen pictures on various social media sites where a truck has struck a bridge.
Yep.
And some of those happen even with a pull car.
Mm-hmm.
And every case is obviously its own situation, but it typically comes down to operator error. Either they were following too close, and so by the time the front car could radio back, I had a strike. That's usually the terminology used, strike. The truck couldn't stop in time, and then they hit it. Or they didn't have their pole set to the right height. So they might have mismeasured the load and thought they were only 15'1" when they were actually 15'4", and they hit a bridge at 15'2", because they thought they were 15'1". So it's typically when you see a bridge strike, no matter what anybody says, it's operator error, either the driver or the pilot car. That bridge didn't shrink overnight. You know what I mean? So something happened.
Right.
Then there's also circumstances where guys just don't want to pay for a pull car. And so you still get the permit issued to you under the condition that you will hire a pull car. Oh. And there are times where guys think they know the route. Oh, I've ran this 100 times. There's no bridges under 15 foot. My load's only 14, 11. We'll be fine. Mm-hmm. And then they hit a bridge,
And then, like you said, it's all on the driver.
Right. And my company has a policy, anything 15 feet or over, we use a pull car. Mm-hmm. Out west here, it's not required. Like Washington State, for example, does not require you to have a pull car if you had a 15-foot load. But they put the responsibility on you to know your route. So my boss, we're a smaller company, and so that's bid into any load we do. And it's come up where customers have called back, like, why is this so expensive? And he'll be like, well, we need a pull car. And a lot of the customers know the regulations, and they'll say, no, you don't. This load's only 15 feet. And he said, well, that's our policy. Because we've never had a bridge strike, and we don't plan to start.
That extra precaution for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, these escort cars have always baffled me, because sometimes it maybe this goes along with their training, but sometimes you see loads that do not have, but they're oversized. And then other times you'll see only one in front or only one behind. And sometimes they'll be, a half mile out in front or a mile out in front. And sometimes they'll be right in front of them. Sometimes they'll be right on their tail. Seem to be like any, set standard. Like you said, a bridge strike might happen because they were following too close. Well, is that the trucker's fault because he's too close, or is it the pilot car because he's not staying? Is there like a specific plan that these escort guys are supposed to go by? Are they supposed to keep a certain amount of distance between the truck and themselves, or does that just depend on the load and the route? So
every permit is a little different, but typically it will specify in there how far, like if you have a lead pilot car, how far they want that pilot car. And it may say something like, 1,500 feet, no more than half a mile, or it may say up to a mile, something like that.
And does that vary by state to state?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Every state. Mm-hmm. So all permits are issued at a state level.
Okay.
So we all know how state regulations vary on everything from state to state. So yeah, that all is up to each and every state. And then it also depends, again, back to are you on a 2-lane road, or are you on a 4-lane with no divider in the middle? Just those kind of things. Every state has their own, what they think makes it safer or not safer. But so once you know what the permit says, there's always a little, like I said, it may say, up to a half a mile. Now it's between the driver and the escort to determine where they want that pilot car, right? Yeah. So you don't need to tailgate your pilot car. And actually, when I have a front car, I want to see them. I don't want them so far ahead that I can't see them anymore, but I want them as far out there as possible, because if there's an issue, because they also call stuff out to you as a driver. So they may tell you you're about to meet another oversized load, or that there's a parked car right on the white line on the shoulder and you need to move over because you're 14 feet wide or whatever. Well, I don't want to be having to do that last minute. So I always have what I would call like a pre-trip discussion with my pilot cars before I ever leave. And I know not every driver does that. I know of guys that literally will meet their pilot car at a location and never even get out of the vehicle. They'll just talk over the CD for 2 minutes and let's go. And I always get out. I show them my permit. Most time I have a copy for them. I think by law they're supposed to have one. So I make sure I have a copy for them. I'll always ask them, are you familiar with the route? Have you ever run this route before? Because a lot of pilots work in a region, so they know that area really well. Or they may be traveling like a long-haul truck driver. Oh, I've never been here before in my life. So I want to know these things so there's no surprises. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the last thing you need when you're over-dimensional is a surprise.
Yeah.
So I try and get all that stuff out ahead of time, and then I'll tell them, if there's, specific things that I want done in my route. So I may say something like, hey, about 100 miles out, I know that there's this wide spot on this road that we're on. I want to stop there and do a load check. Be ready for that. Don't, because if you may not remember to tell them and they're already past it,
right.
You need them to stop so that you can pull in behind them.
You talked about the pre-planning. This seems to me like one of the most important aspects of this whole thing. Cause I know, I've driven, regular truck, regular size truck for 23 years, and they talk about once you've been driving for a while, honestly, you don't do a lot of pre-trip stuff. You start your trip, you kind of know, I'm probably going to make it over here to this one truck stop or in the area. And then you start looking when you get to your 10 hours to park, and you don't put a lot of thought into it sometimes. But with these kinds of loads, you can't do that, can you?
Correct. Yeah. And so some of it is if you stay regional. So a lot of the guys that do the really big stuff, the multi-axle, heavy haul, over-dimensional freight, are local or at least regional. So they know their territory very, very well. Mm-hmm. They may only ever go 200 or 300 miles from wherever their home base is and come right back. Like the radius may only be about a 200 or 300 mile radius. So they know every wide spot. They know every truck stop. Yeah, so they can probably take off without having to really look at a map and figure out where it is they're going. Mm-hmm. And I've done that. I've worked for companies doing this kind of freight that's how we worked. And it's, on one hand, that's, it's a lot easier. The guy I'm working for now, we're much more, we're technically all 48 states. As far east as I've been with this big trailer with this company is Missouri area. And so once I get outside of the Northwest here, I'm kind of out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
I don't know what truck stops I can get. My trailer, my normal trailer that I pull from bumper to bumper, I'm 120 feet long. So I cannot just pull into any old fuel stop even just to get fuel. Yeah. Because as we all know, when you go through the fuel island, most of them you have to either make a sharp right or left turn to get out of the truck stop. Mm-hmm. And if there's somebody already parked ahead of the fuel island on my right or left, I may not be able to make that turn.
Well, not to mention that the fuel bays are only so wide. A truck through there, and sometimes, you have a foot or two on each side, and that's it, Yep.
So. Yeah. So that's where, and the hard part is, so there's really not a lot of data. You think in this modern age with our smartphones and apps for everything, there's not a lot of data out there that tells you, how wide a fuel island is. Can I get through there with my 16 wide load? Stuff like that. So some of it's common sense. You just know certain brand truck stops. For me, it's Pilot. I'm not going into a Pilot truck stop when I'm pulling my big trailer and I'm 14 or 15 feet wide. Yeah, they're narrow. In my experience, They tend to be smaller. Yeah. Some loves out here on the West Coast are big. There's a couple in California that I can easily get my truck and trailer into and spend the night and do whatever I need to do. And then the very next one down the road may be as small as a 7-Eleven. So what I have found for my planning, one of the most useful tools I have is satellite view on Google Maps.
Oh,
so
okay.
If a truck stop's not too new, to where it doesn't, because I've had that happen. I've done a satellite search and it's like, oh, it's not even on Google Maps yet.
Right.
Like they know the address, but they don't have a satellite view of it.
Right.
But if you can get a satellite view with experience, doing this, I don't know that you'd figured out your first time pulling one, but after you've done these enough times, you can kind of look at the layout of the truck stop and see on the satellite view, oh yeah, if nobody's parked there, I can swing through there and I can park next to the scale, and you can kind of figure it out. I've had that backfire a few times, but I've never been in a situation that I couldn't get out of. What has happened is I've had to wait almost an hour for enough trucks to get out of my way so that I could actually leave the truck stop because I was pinned in.
Oh, yeah.
And that just kind of goes with this kind of freight. You're not. So the biggest thing I always tell people that because we've got a couple guys where I work now that are working their way towards what I do, and they pull low boys, but not quite as big as stuff. And they're gunning for it. They really want to do it. And the biggest thing you have to get over when you get into this big stuff is the gotta run miles. This kind of freight is not about how many miles you do a day. You are going to sit a lot. You're going to get stuck in places, like I said, where you may have to wait 20 or 30 minutes just to pull out of the fuel island because the guy to your right has you blocked in and he's taking his 30. It's just part of this kind of freight. So if you're the kind of person that just needs to burn miles, this is not the kind of work for you. You have to be okay with, 300-mile days. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and it happens a lot. A lot of it can just be because you're so heavy. I mean, I had a trip out west here where I ran my full 11 hours and I only did like 312 miles. Just because my speed there were so many hills and mountains, I just could never get my average speed up over, 40 miles an hour. So you have to get over that mindset of, and that's the other thing. And I'm sure a lot of people are always curious, kind of falls on pay, how we're paid.
So that's definitely one of my questions I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so in my experience, nobody doing this really big stuff is paid by the mile. So every company is a little different. You may find a company that pays by the hour. I've done this on an hourly rate. Some people pay percentage, and some people pay salary. So you just have to, figure out what system works best for you. And, when you make an agreement with an employer, but regardless of how they pay, it usually benefits you. It usually makes up for the fact that you're sitting a lot and that you're, there's times depending on what area you're in, you may not even be allowed to drive on the weekend. Your permit shuts you down. So you got to be parked by noon on Friday and you cannot start driving again until Monday morning. Well, if you're a general freight hauler, I mean, you just lost at least 1,300 miles,
right?
Because you couldn't drive. I guess I put it this way: if you're not compensated for that, you're with the wrong company. We do very specialized work. Not to say that I don't feel like I'm better than anybody else. I honestly think anybody can do what I do. It's not like I have some superpower.
It's experience.
Exactly. I would say it's a learned skill. You don't just jump into it, but at the same time, you can easily work your way into it. So yeah, we're not special. We're not, we're just truck drivers, but it is specialized and it does take experience to do it. So most companies that do this kind of freight recognize that and they reward their employees accordingly.
Since you mentioned, how you work your way up into this, why don't we go ahead and address that? Cause I'm sure there's somebody out there right now who is haul those big loads. They seem so interesting and it's not, hauling a boring dry van and, it keep my day and my career interesting and give me some good stories and stuff. So how do they get started? I'm assuming they just get started flatbeds probably.
And I have a lot of people that have asked me that, like, how did you get into that? I feel like every situation's different. I don't think there is any standard, like, cookie cutter. If you want to be a heavy hauler, this is the steps you got to take. But generally speaking, most people will agree, you got to do flatbed work.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you got to know how to secure loads on an open deck.
Yeah. I've driven 23 years, but I'm not dry van into, you know, what you're doing, or even heavy haul, you know, even just normal heavy haul, not these overdimensional stuff you're talking about. You know, I mean, I couldn't even just jump from my job to a flatbed job because I've never tarped down. I've never had to. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm just not prepared for it.
And I do know that there are companies out there that have, for lack of a better phrase or term, training programs. They have things in place to help somebody get into all the way up to like multi-axle lowboy work.
Right.
And I know some of the bigger, because there's big companies that do this kind of freight, like ATS and Lone Star, and there's a few of them out there. So they have programs where they'll have you pull like so you might be, you know, the terminology, you know, you might be 6-axle setup or 7 or 8-axle. So what that would mean is, you know, it's literally how many axles are on your truck and trailer. But that might just be a truck and trailer. So you typically, all heavy haul over-dimensional guys are going to have a 4-axle tractor. Now, there are obviously exceptions to that, but as a rule or as a standard, everybody that's going to get into real heavy stuff is going to have a 4-axle tractor. And then you would have, you know, a 3 or 4 or even higher. I mean, out east, they run 5 and 6-axle trailers. We don't really run them out west here. But, you know, so now you're an 8-axle setup. And so you gain experience because those handle different. They don't turn corners the same way as a trailer that has sliding tandems. Because anytime, typically speaking, if you're 3 axles or more, they're fixed tandems. You know, they're a fixed axle group. So they pivot, you know, like a lowboy, you know, or people call them double drops, RGN, whatever you want to call it. But a lowboy trailer, even a tandem, a 2-axle one, those wheels are fixed in that rear position.
Uh-huh.
So imagine driving your 53-foot van trailer around with the tandem slid to the rear and never moving them, just leaving them there all the time. Backing in's a little different. Taking corners, a little different.
Yep.
Then the other thing you have to remember is our tractors are typically longer because of that 4th axle. So now we're stretched out. So like the truck you drove when you were over the road was probably, around a 250-inch wheelbase, I'm assuming, 240 probably. Mine's 300. So now you've got a longer tractor, so that makes backing in and, you know, like when you're going to a truck stop, you know, just a little more challenging. And then where the 5th wheel is set and where the kingpin on the trailer is way different. We don't have as deep a kingpin settings typically on these types of trailers. So our overall length is considerably longer than an average freight hauler. And all that factors in. So that's where you start to get that experience. So once you start pulling, you know, a multi-axle trailer, whether it's a flatbed, step deck, lowboy, now you're starting to get the experience of handling, being long all the time, you know, getting around corners, getting backed in places. And then, you know, for me, a lot of it was dumb luck. I think how I personally got into what I'm doing now is I started doing what I thought at the time was heavy haul out here in the Northwest, running 8 axles, so 4-axle tractor, 4-axle trailer, and we were registered for 105,500 pounds. So coming from dry van freight, you know, I'm 25,000 pounds heavier now. To me, that's heavy haul.
Sure.
And there was a small learning curve. I don't think it's as big as a leap as you would think to go to that extra weight, but there was a little bit, you know, and being in the Northwest, you had to be a little careful because of the hills and stuff. You definitely notice, you know, the lack of power to get up a hill, and you notice the extra braking power needed to get down it.
Yeah. Let me stop you right there for a second, because you put, I don't know if anybody recognizes, but Travis is a member of the Trucker Dump Slack group, and he posts this kind of stuff in the group sometimes. What he's doing. You posted going up Cabbage in Oregon one time. Do you remember those numbers you gave us for how much fuel you burned and how long it took and how long that stretch of hill is right there? Can you?
If you know the area, you know I-84 there.
Yeah.
There's as you start up that hill, there's almost right away it starts a 3rd lane for the truck lane to get up the hill. Because most, even your regular 80,000 pound trucks tend to go pretty slow up that hill.
Yeah.
So before I even got to that truck lane, I was already in the low side of my transmission. So that tells you how much of a grade that you would never even notice. Like, you would be into that third lane before you would be like, oh, we're starting up the hill.
Yeah. Now, how heavy was this load again?
I was 200 and I don't remember the exact number. I think I was right at 225 or maybe 228, just under 230,000 pounds.
Wow. Yeah.
On all 11 axles. And, so by the time I get to the truck lane, I'm already down in like third or fourth gear. And then by the time I hit the actual grade, there were spots, and this is something you really start to notice when you're this heavy, that just the ever so subtle change in road elevation that you would never notice in any other vehicle, because you're over it before I'm doing 4 miles an hour, so you notice every little change and everything.
4 miles an hour. Four.
I was going between. So I have an 18-speed transmission, which is basically an 8-speed with highs and lows on each gear. So I was on the high side of first gear and the low side of second gear. I was able to go back and forth between those gears just in the slight little changes in elevation. Now, I do not remember the exact speed that I was doing on that hill. I think at one point I did manage to get up to about 6 miles an hour or something like that. Right. But my truck has a real-time, dash display that shows my fuel economy.
Uh-huh.
And that was the thing that I found very interesting. So I was getting 0.39 miles to the gallon going up that hill, and it was at that number for 10 miles. So the grade, I don't think, is technically considered a 10-mile hill. But like I said, it started almost a mile sooner for me than it would for most people.
Yeah.
And even when I got to where you would think the top is, I still was trying to, wind her back up and get going. So it was 10 miles that I was in the low side of my transmission. So, do the math there. I did it that day. I made the post. I don't remember now, but it was, like 20 or 30 gallons of fuel it took me to climb that section of the hill.
That's insane. Yeah. How that same hill? I mean, you can't just let her coast like a lot of us do.
It's the same. That's where that old rule of thumb that most of us that probably been driving over 10 or 15 years was taught. You go down the hill in the same gear that you go up. I think newer trucks, that's not 100% accurate. Newer trucks have much better Jake brakes and braking technology, so you can probably go down a little faster than you went up. But when you're over like 140, 150,000 pounds, you want to go down it as slow as you went up it. Because if it starts to get away from you, it's terrifying.
Yeah. This is just like you were saying, this is not a job for the impatient, for the, the person who thinks they got to be going balls to the wall all the time. You have got, or you're going to die and kill lots of people with you. I mean, man.
So to give you a good example, I ran a big Vermeer trencher from Iowa out to California, and they had me go up the way the permits were out of me. I left out of Reno up 395. I was going to Chico, and so it had me go up 395 into like the Susanville area. And then I don't remember all the highway numbers now. I'd have to have a map in front of me. But anyhow, you work your way over. And I came out at Redding and then dropped south on I-5. So if anybody's ran that part of California off the interstate out through the Lassen volcanic area, it's pretty hilly, 2-lane, curvy roads. And they're not as marked as good as the interstate. So you might be just kind of puttering along, and all of a sudden you're going downhill, and then there's a corner in front of you, and you realize, oh, this is a 8% grade for 7 miles, and you better be in the right gear. You don't necessarily have the warning signs like you would on an interstate. And, there were a couple hills out there that machine, I was right at like 205,000 loaded, that I was like, this is, because they caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting it to be that steep. I'm not familiar with that route. I don't run it all the time. And, like you're right. You don't want to panic. You don't want to freak out. But, you're like, I got to get this under control right now because it's going to get away from me. Your heart rate definitely goes up.
Yeah. Well, speaking of control, would you ever consider doing your job with an automatic transmission?
I would. I know guys that do. I just talked to a
Really?
Landstar.
Okay.
Yeah, I talked to a Landstar guy the other day. He's got a brand new 2020 Kenworth with an automatic, and he loves it. He said it's the best thing in the world. I've driven automatics before. I drove the first generation ones when they first came out, and they were worthless.
Yeah,
big
they're
chunk
bad.
Of garbage.
Yeah.
And then I have driven in a rental truck. The latest was 2019, a Freightliner, and it was pretty slick. Now, granted, I wasn't heavy hauling in that, but it worked pretty well. I think it comes down to, and the guy I talked to, he's a heavy haul guy. He pulls what they call it 13 axles. So I'm 11 axles. He was 13 axles. But he said you have to, when you get it from the dealership, they can set up the shift parameters for those automatics.
Sure.
Well, auto shifts. I don't want anybody trying to correct me. They're not true automatics. They're just auto shifts. But
yeah,
we all know what we're talking about. But so they can set the shift parameters on that. And he said that's the key to making these successful for heavy haul is you have to make sure they program it for, appropriately for the type of loads you're going to be hauling. And he had it, it's brand new, but he's, had it like 6 or 7 months. He said he loves it. He's never going to go back to manual again. It's still an 18 speed. It's still, it's still everything I have. It's just he doesn't have to push, he doesn't have to change gears.
All of us drivers miss all of us. And the last thing I would want is to, miss that gear when you're coming up on that 8% grade, like you're talking about, and just all of a sudden you find yourself coasting it on the hill. That's not good.
Well, and the thing is, like, if you're going uphill and you're trying to downshift, if you miss a gear, you don't even try and recover. Just go to the next one. Because by the time, you get what I'm saying? You've got so much rolling resistance that by the time you are able to try and rematch the RPMs and get it back in that gear, you've already lost another 10 miles an hour. So just skip that gear and just get it in the next hole. If that ends up being too low and you start to over rev, you can always upshift. But if you dick around and, try and get it in that gear, you're just going to stall out. And then you do not want to have to try and start from a dead stop when you're that heavy on an incline.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be done, obviously, but it's not an enjoyable thing to do.
Yeah. Most of us never use our granny gear. 10-speed, trucks out here, but I imagine you would have to use it in that situation.
I use it at every stop.
Yeah, I bet you do.
I can't even pull away from a red light without being in. When I'm fully loaded, every time I come, like any stop sign, any dead stop, truck stop, whatever, I'm in actual low before I can even get the truck moving.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I mentored not too long ago. I mentored a guy, and I was starting out in fourth. We don't haul a lot of heavy loads. I get like a 15,000-20,000 pound load is pretty heavy for us most of the time in LTL. And I'm in fourth, and I skip shift over to sixth, and he's like, "What? What? How many gears is this speed?" And he goes, "Well, you're only shifting like 4 times. What's going on?" He'd never been into really the skip shift, and you could not start out in fourth gear in what you're doing.
I couldn't do it even when I'm empty. My empty weight is 83,000 pounds.
Good Lord.
So I'm happy if I can start out in first gear when I'm empty.
Yeah. And
then when I'm loaded, I'm in granny low, and I actually go to the high side of low. I don't skip straight to first. Like I work each gear. When I'm fully loaded, I run through every gear. Now some of that's just amazing because I try and take as much stress off of the clutch and all that kind of stuff. I probably could, skip occasional gear here and there if I wanted to, especially on flat ground.
Yeah.
But it's just added wear and tear. There's no reason to, I'm not, again, patience is king. I'm not going to get anywhere any quicker by skipping a gear. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this comes into play where we were talking about, pay compensation. It's like, if you're getting paid by the mile, you tend to, you're going to ram, you're going to have your foot in the accelerator all the time. You're going
want to hustle.
Yeah, you're going as fast as you can, but if you're getting paid hourly or, salary or whatever, you're more apt to be safer and probably way more fuel efficient too, because you're just taking your time. You're not in a huge.
And I'm sure you've had this conversation. I know I've had it a million times. I mean, I feel like that's one of the biggest failures with trucking. The way the average truck driver, and you're fully aware of it now because you're in an hourly, scaled position.
Of it's hourly. I'm still per mile, but only my sitting around and waiting is, if I have to sit around and wait is hourly, or my work. But yeah, my rolling miles are still paid per mile.
But the fact that you're compensated for your downtime, I guess is what I was trying to get at. That's what I feel has been wrong with the trucking industry in general is, it's always that the wheels ain't turning, you ain't earning.
Yeah.
Well, why? I'm away from home. I'm on the job. I'm considered responsible for this vehicle. I need to be. And so I'm currently salaried, and I love it.
Yeah.
It's not like a salary position at, a normal, say a warehouse job where they're going to call you in and make you work late. Well, you're salaried. You got to do it. I'm still bound by the law. I'm still bound by what I can do in any given day. And the fact that if I'm stuck for the weekend because my permit says I can't drive, or I'm stuck 6 hours because the crane didn't show up to load me or offload me, or, I could rattle off delays all day long. We're all, even in normal freight, we have delays. So in my world, there's even more. The fact that I know I can count on my paycheck, it's the same every week, no matter what I do, it does change your mind frame. You're less likely to take shortcuts. You're less so when my boss tells me, here's something that probably not a lot of companies in general do. He bought me one of those laser temperature, so you can check temperature stuff. And he wants me to, or requires me to check my hub temps on my trailer every time I stop and do a load check. So we're, by law, when you're in flatbed work, you have to do a load check I always screw this up, but it's like every 150 miles or 2 hours or every 200 miles, something like that. I don't know the specifics really, and I should, but I stop typically more than that anyhow, so I'm not real worried about it. So we're required to stop, and that's any flatbed freight. Now, a lot of guys obviously don't do it, but
right.
You're supposed to. It's kind of like hazmat, how you're supposed to do your load checks. Yeah. So now when I do that, I take a temp of all, just on the trailer, but all of my hubs. And the reasoning behind that is if you start to have a wheel seal or wheel bearing going out, it's going to get hotter. And that can cause major issues for me if I break down on the road due to a bad wheel bearing. So we keep a log of that. I write down those temps, and then I can, reflect back on that and go, wow, this one position is spiking, Well, at first I was like, it's just one more thing I got to do. But it's like, you know what? I'm paid salary. It's my job. If
who cares?
I'll do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll do it. He doesn't put unreasonable demands on me. If I get 300 miles or 350 in a day, we mark that up as a win. That's a good day. And that's, I don't know that every company would be that understanding, but he knows enough to know that, when you're hauling, 180, 190, 200,000 pounds, you're just not going to do 600, 700, 800 miles in a day. It's just not possible,
Well,
so,
it's good that they have the realistic expectations of you. Yeah.
I'm fortunate.
Yeah.
I work for a pretty good guy. Yeah. So.
Yeah, sounds like it. Well, you mentioned the delays, and that is one of the big questions I got from people that I was asking about, hey, what do you got questions for this guy? And they were like, what about these delays? Cause you see a story in the news every once in a while. Some oversized load has been sitting on the side of the road for a week and a half, and they're like, how is the driver compensated for that? Or are they still with the load? Or, what is the purpose there for so long? Are they waiting on something in particular? What's going on with those kind of loads? So again, it's case by case, right? The ones like you're describing that are a really long delay like that, in my experience and what little bit I know about things, those are typically what would be considered a super load. And it's probably because for whatever reason,
somebody realized something was wrong in their permit. So it may be maybe an issue like with utilities. So a lot of your, like these big transformers and stuff that get moved, that go out to a dam or something, there's not a superhighway out to that river. So they're going down little 2-lane roads. And so a lot of times they have to do months of prep work just to take that load out there.
Wow. Yeah.
And it may be that the truck gets there and it's like, well, they were supposed to have these power lines taken down or rerouted, and they do that kind of stuff. And it didn't get done, even though the permit got issued and the route survey got done and all that kind of stuff. Well, now they're stuck waiting on whatever utility company to come out and, take those lines down for them. Or, it could be they're going through a town and they were supposed to move a couple street signs so they don't run them over. That's the ones that you see sitting for like a week. Or there's just in general a permit issue. And so they're grounded. They can't do anything.
Yeah, I can imagine also a case where maybe, like the receiver isn't quite whatever it was, but they're not quite ready for it yet, and you just can't haul it in there and, drop it off.
Now, in my world, so we don't get into stuff quite that big. Like I said, my setup is 11 axles. And so I'm still a super load a lot of times in a lot of states just because of my weight, typically not my width or height, but my weight will call me a super load. But every type of super load has its own set of restrictions. So I'm usually not, as long as the biggest thing I'll get is, and it's very confusing, is in my permit, it will list out bridges by some silly identifier that's only marked right on the bridge when you get there. And it'll say, they cross this bridge at less than 5 miles an hour. Or it might give the river crossing, but when you're out on country roads going through Iowa, you don't know what river, and so those are a little confusing to keep up with, or cross at 45 miles an hour, cross center lane only, and that's all in your permit. But the type of delays I typically deal with are getting the permit in the first place. Mm-hmm. A lot of times companies and shippers get excited. We'll get loaded up, and let's say you're in Iowa, and bang, we got the Iowa permit. Head out. Well, Missouri's dragging their feet and hasn't got me my permit yet. So now I'm stuck at the Iowa-Missouri line. Well, now, it's a Friday. Oh, well, we're not going to get it till Monday. So now you're stuck for the weekend. Then Monday, Missouri says, oh, we want a route survey. Well, that takes an extra day, and so you could end up sitting somewhere 3 or 4 days just because, in my opinion, because somebody got excited and said, let's go. I would rather see all my permits in my hand before I ever leave where I'm at.
That's what all the time, but it doesn't apparently. Yeah,
it does not.
Well, you mentioned a route survey. What does that involve? Are they just somebody just go out and drive the route, looking at all of the heights of the wires and that stuff just to make sure you can fit?
Correct. Yeah. So some of your pilot car services, and I don't know if they need an additional certification, but that's who will do the route survey for you.
Oh, okay.
And so they basically give a certified or stamped route that they certify I have driven this route and know of no obstructions, that there be no issues.
Right.
And they'll make additional notes. They may make notes on that route that say wide spot at this point, especially on 2-lane roads, trying to, so if you needed to pull over there, they noticed there was this, or intersection of these 2 roads was narrow, may need to go up on sidewalk, things like that. So they make these little notes, and then they turn that into the state, and then the state will use that to decide if they want to allow you to run that route. They may say no. So then you may have to call the pilot car company back and say, well, try a different route, go a different way. Most of the companies that do route surveys, have done them enough times that they know as soon as you tell them your dimensions, they're like, oh yeah, I know you can go this way. And then by law, they're supposed to physically go drive it, and then they turn in that copy. Whether they do or not, I don't know. But that's on them. If they submitted a route survey that they didn't actually run, then they would be in trouble. It's like falsifying. But there are companies, that like I said, because they're regional or local, they run that area so much that as soon as you tell them what your dimensions are, they know, oh, you have to go this way because you can't go this way because of a bridge or a tunnel or whatever. So that's where it pays to have reputable, knowledgeable pilot cars because they do know their territories typically.
Yeah.
So that's your route surveys. And so then the state uses that to decide, okay, sounds good. We'll give you a permit. You can run this.
Yeah. It just seems weird that they would actually need to do that because, you know, it seems like once they do that, they kind of know, you know, all of the bridge heights and stuff like that and know exactly,
Right.
You know, if you say, well, I'm 15 feet, they would know, you would think.
Well, and what's funny is, so it still falls back to now you've got a route survey, and now you've got a state that says, okay, we agree with that. Because that's the thing. The state may look at that and go, no, that doesn't sound right. Because like you said, they may have information that says, we're pretty sure there's an obstruction, somewhere.
Okay. So then if there's a disagreement, that's when they're going to go and do the thing to make
sure.
Different
route survey. Yeah, do a different route survey.
Play.
Once you get past all that, you've got your route survey, you got your permit in hand, you're good to go. Still driver responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest thing that cracks me up. I'm the guy, I don't know what's up ahead of me. That's why I have a pilot car. That's why I had a route survey. That's why I got a permit. But you're still, if something happens, they're still going to say, your fault.
That is never going to change, though. Always, it's like it's no different than me getting a hazmat load and it's already loaded, it's already sealed, but it's my DOT officer opens that up and it's not braced and blocked correctly. It's still my responsibility. I guess, I'm supposed to go break that seal, crawl in the back of every trailer, look, make sure it's strapped, and that's my responsibility. It sucks, but that's drivers, I guess.
And in your world, because I worked for a company that did that type of freight briefly, you're trusting dock workers, like you said, because typically the driver's not loading his own trailer. The company I worked for, they went so far as to they had a little picture of the trailer and you had to mark roughly where in the trailer the hazmat was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know for a fact from spending time on the dock with some of these guys that once they got all done, they were like, oh, there was hazmat in there. And they just it was right here. It's like they just pencil whip it. And so you're right. You're hoping somebody did their job because now it's on you,
Yeah. Wow.
They got to blame somebody, I guess.
Know it.
And since we make the big money, we're the easy choice.
Sure. Let's go with that. Hey, you want to talk about money for a second? What? I'm not asking you to give your salary. How much more? I mean, I assume you're paid more than the average, dry van hauler or reefer hauler or whatever, just because of the complexity of your job and the responsibility that goes along with it. Is it worth the? Obviously it is because you're doing it, but how much extra compensation are we talking about here?
I hear of guys that, and that's the thing. You never know if somebody's just inflating their numbers.
Truckers don't lie.
Right. Yeah. So sometimes I'll hear guys talking and I'm just like, oh, dang, I thought I was doing pretty good, but wow, they're doing way better than me.
Yeah.
And they're hauling like a dry van. And it's just like, how's that possible? How do you make that much money? I mean, I'm doing this, super specialized work and you're making more money than me, supposedly.
Yeah.
I don't know. All I can go off is me personally. So
Mm-hmm.
personally, yes, the money's worth it. I would say based off of, because it's been a long time since I just hauled general dry van freight.
Sure. Yeah.
But based off of my personal experience, I'm probably making 20% more than I ever did hauling a dry van.
Right.
And in my mind, I work probably 50% less. There's a lot of mental aspect to what I do. And there's a lot of like weight on your shoulders, if that makes sense. Because, you are responsible for this, massive heavy load or big load, wide load. But the actual physical demand on me for what I do, I feel like is way less than it ever was, even when I held a dry van. All I do, breaking my trailer apart and loading it, that's some work. But once I'm loaded, it's just like a walk in the park.
Like you said, it could take 3 to 5 days for a load or whatever, and then you're
1,000 miles away.
and you're not even, so you're not touching that load again until you get there, other than, checking it, to make sure everything's still secure and things like that. But you do have those delays. that, as we all know, truckers hate delays. But again, if you're compensated correctly for that, it's not that big of a deal. Like, I don't mind delays now with my job because I'm getting paid for it. Whereas, you're over the road, you're sitting in a dock, it's taking 6 hours to get loaded. Most people aren't, or if they are, it's such a minimal amount, whereas, well, that was one of the things I was going to ask, like delays. You have the normal waiting for delays to get your load started. Like, I'm assuming like you'll go to a certain spot on the highway or whatever. Now you're waiting on a pilot car, and then, like you have to wait to get into a fuel bay and
if you got a good pilot car, you should never wait on your pilot car. But you're right. A lot of times you do get there and like, where's my escort? They're not here yet.
Yeah.
But yep. You're right.
Yeah. And now you're just sitting around waiting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, so you might wait for a permit. We have to stop at every open scale. Now,
ask about that. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, I assumed.
So that's, in my mind, that's a bit of a delay. Even if I don't have to park and go inside, which I don't always have to, but I have to pull into every open scale. Well, with how long it takes me to get rolling again, that's a delay. They're going to weigh me. You know what I mean? So a lot of times, like a regular truck might go through and you just roll across the scale and have a good day, and it just sucks because you had a speed bump.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to 9 out of 10 times, they're going to axle me out.
Sure.
I'm going to have to stop on every, I got 11 axles and I'm 120 feet long. Sometimes I'm past the red light before I'm off the scale.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So now I got to listen really carefully out my window because they'll say over the PA, stop. And you hope they don't say back up because it's almost impossible to back up my setup.
Right.
And so those are all, in my mind, delays. I guess for me, I've been doing this long enough that it doesn't bother me. I got past that point of having, I got to go.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And then I was going to say, you made the comment earlier. So, I think another advantage to this type of work where even though you're getting delayed, so in general freight, all those delays, you're constantly thinking, I'm wasting my 14 hours and I'm going to have to drive a little bit, because you might have been on track to burn up your 11 hours well before your 14 were up. Well, now you got delayed here an hour. So now I got to, go another hour into the night or whatever to make my 11 hours. I don't have to do that. Yeah. So the advantage to what I do is even if my permit says I can run at night, I rarely run at night. And for me, it's just a safety thing.
Yeah.
Even though the state says, you're only 10 feet wide, go ahead. I just don't want to do it. I can't see my load. All kinds of stuff can be happening back there that in the night you can't see. I can't tell if a chain came loose. I can't tell if, a door opened on that excavator. You just can't see that stuff at night. So I very rarely run loaded at night. So if I'm delayed, I just call my boss and we're stuck here. I'm delayed. So I'm going to go to bed. And there's times I might just say, well, I'm done for the day. I'm going to park because I already know that if I leave here, when I do have to stop, I'll be out in the middle of nowhere and there'll be nowhere for me to stop. I can't just pull in. You talk about accessibility. A big thing that's really difficult for me is rest areas. I cannot always just pull into any old rest area, especially as they start to fill up because of how guys will just park along the curb.
Sure.
I could literally get stuck in the ramp and just be stuck there and have to go knock on doors to ask somebody to move because I can't make it through the rest area.
You can get stuck in a rest area at night in a normal sized truck, just because the way morons park,
So you get what I'm saying. So I avoid them. I rarely pull into rest areas unless I know them, unless I'm in an area where I know, this one's got California's kind of actually good because they have big dirt patches, and I'll just leave the pavement and go pull out in the dirt,
Right. Yeah.
But Oregon or other states, even out in the Midwest, like the way their rest areas are set up, it's like you got to be able to pull, and then I can't fit in a space. So if I pull in there's got to be like 4 or 5 empty spaces next to each other so I can just kind of diagonally go across them. So yeah, I avoid rest areas. Like I said earlier, I typically use my Google Earth and I look for truck stops. So in my trip planning, what that will tell me is, I could probably make it to this point but the only truck stops around there are so small I'd never be able to park in them.
Right.
So I can't get past that point legally, so I have to shut down early. And that's another, that goes along with the worried about how many miles you get a day. That's another thing that a lot of guys, when they're new to this, it just kills them to park at 2 p.m.
Yeah, yeah.
And you tend to do that more in the winter time because it's going to get dark at 4:30 anyhow.
Yeah, yeah.
But
you got to beat the crowds into those truck stops.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Then it could be a double-edged sword. I'm on the road. I'm allowed to hit the road 30 minutes before sunrise.
Uh-huh.
Well, in the wintertime, I'm going to be on the road 30 minutes before sunrise. Well, if somebody rolled in there at 8, 9 o'clock that night and just parked wherever their truck came to a stop, I might not be able to leave at daylight because they're still on their 10-hour break. And I have had to go wake people up, regrettably. I don't like doing it, but, common sense, if you see a big oversized load parked somewhere, don't pin them in, because they're probably going to roll out at daylight.
Yeah, I think most of us truckers have probably done that. Well, had to get up and to wake people just even with our normal trucks, because people are morons and they park wherever they have to park, where they feel they have to.
Right.
And you've got to go wake 2 or 3 people up just to get out in the morning, and they're pissed and hey, it's their own fault. They're the ones that are parked illegal, not you.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So, but and you can work around that if you can get your route planning, if you can look ahead, and get in, so I like to park along curves. I'll try and get into a truck stop, like I said, and park next to the scale or next to a curb so that I got a straight shot. I can just pull straight out in the morning. And most truck stops don't give me a hard time about that.
That's what I was going to say. I'm guessing lots of people don't give you, even probably cops don't give you a hard time. Like if you're parked in a wide spot on the highway or something like that overnight, they're probably not going to give you a hard time about that, are they?
Not that I've experienced. And talk about like wide spots. So there's been times that I've exited and there'll be a big dirt patch and actually dropped my trailer there, so that I could bobtail either to a truck stop that I couldn't get into with the load or to a hotel. Sometimes we'll just get hotels. But that's the other thing. So if you know where you are or you know the area and you're like, man, I got to get fuel, but I know I can't get into that place, you have to drop your trailer and then bobtail down, get your fuel, do all your stuff, and then bobtail back to your trailer and finish your, go where you're going or spend the night, whatever you're doing. And I have had to do that. And you're right. You're not, the odds of you coming back and your load got towed are pretty slim.
Yeah. Who's gonna
tow trucks that, there's not many tow trucks that can tow my trailer away. So I'm not ever worried about, the biggest fear you have is that somebody will come along and try and steal gear off of it because our chains and binders are, valuable.
Yeah.
But other than that, you're right. As long as you're clearly, it's a safety thing, you're out of the way. I carry traffic cones so I can put cones out around my trailer. And I don't know that. I mean, it's not to say a cop wouldn't give you a ticket because, cops do that kind of stuff. But I think we do get a little more leeway. We have a little more compassion and empathy because they know we can't just go anywhere.
Sure.
And that does stand true for most truck stops. I mean, I've even had truck stops tell me, oh, park in that no parking zone over there, you'll be fine. Because they know I can't park anywhere else,
Right. Yeah.
Because sometimes I'll do that. I'll go in somewhere and just ask them, like, hey, see me out there in the fuel line. Is there somewhere I can, can I park? Because I like to park like along the shop or, somewhere where I feel I'm out of the way, but I might be in the shop's way. And 9 out of 10 times they'll be like, oh yeah, you're fine right there. We won't bother you.
Well, it sounds like this job just involves a lot more communication than the average driver. I mean, you're having to go in to verify where you can park at truck stops or, at rest areas or, you're dealing with, constantly being on the phone or on the CB with these, escort drivers. You've got state permits to deal with and all of this stuff. It just seems like a lot of communication truckers would like to do. A lot of truckers are loners. They don't want to talk to anybody, So
yeah, and then and then the flip is true. You have truckers that as soon as they meet somebody, they want to stand there and tell them their life story because they haven't seen anybody for 6 weeks.
Yeah, true.
And you can't do that. Like when you deal with law enforcement, they're pretty to the point.
Yeah.
So if you've got a police escort, they will typically have a briefing before you take off. But, that's not the time to start telling stories about, this one time when I was out over here, I had a police. They don't care. They don't want to hear it.
Nope.
Plus, they're on.
Let's go.
They're on a schedule.
Yeah.
And they signed up for this. Typically, it's they're off the clock, but they're on. It's a weird way they get paid. It's paid privately.
Yeah.
But they want to get the job done. They want to go. So they don't. And I'm pretty good at that. Like I even with my customers. I'm just here to do my job, and what do I need to do? That's the other thing. Will ask, where do you want to load? Where do you want me to park? Don't just roll into a facility and assume, there's a big spot over there. It must be where they load. No, you got to ask, because, like you said, you don't know. So communication is huge. I always thought it was big just as even general freight, but it's definitely a huge part of when you start getting into overdimensional. As much as it sucks, you got to read your permits. You got to know your route. And that's something I wanted to touch on. So talking about routing, like you were saying, as an experienced driver, you know how to get from one major city to another, typically. You know what I mean? You've driven enough, I'm going to go out here, jump on whatever I-35, and we're going to go down to Kansas City. You know that. You don't got to look it up. You don't got to punch it into your GPS. But you may have to look how to get to the specific address. Now, you and I have been driving a long time. I know not to trust a GPS. I know not to trust Google Maps,
Yeah.
But I also know enough that I can use those tools to get me in the ballpark.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I know enough to, when I look at my GPS and I can look at it and go, whoa, what's that little deflection? And I'll zoom in on it. It's like, why does it, I'm not doing that. And we are route, when we're under permit, the route, is on the permit. So I use my GPS for that. I have a Garmin, and I'm able to put in because sometimes my route may not be the shortest route. Actually,
Right.
It rarely is the shortest route.
Yeah, I bet
So
not.
I can put in those via points. And the only reason I do that is it makes it easier so I don't have to remember. Or what we did in the old days was we wrote it down on a notepad. And
Right.
so you were constantly having to check your notepad, like, where's that intersection? We gotta, we don't get to stay on this road. We have to turn and, go around town or whatever.
Yeah.
So I rely on technology quite a bit. But what's cool is, if you've got your true trucker's atlas, you've got your GPS, and you've even got your phone. If you use all three of those, you are going to rule out 99.9% of any surprises that may happen to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how many times have you heard me say on this show, just one source? Never. I mean, it's just, It's not smart at all. I mean, even back in the day before we had the GPS, we'd rely on the trucker atlas, and then we'd get customer directions from them directly or from our company or something like sources saying how to get into a place. These people, truckers, if you are a trucker that relies on GPS only, please stop. You're going to get yourself in trouble one of these days. Wise up.
And how many times have we seen that where, obviously there's tons of stuff on social media dedicated at poking fun at guys, but, stuck out on a goat trail that, why are you even here? Well, my GPS, it's like.
Yep. Saw a symbol.
Right. Yeah. At what point, at some point when that happened to them, they knew.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
Like, oh, boy, we're screwed. But
they got that cold sweat at some point. Yep. It was like, uh-oh.
That's where that fear kicks in, or that drive to just, I gotta keep going. I gotta get out of here. I can't turn around. So maybe something better is around this next corner. And I get that. And I'll admit, when I first started driving, before we had GPSs, I made a few wrong turns back in the day and ended up on roads I shouldn't have been on. And, and you do kind of, it's a weird, it's that hope. Well, it'll get better because you can't back up. You can't turn around. You know that. Mm-hmm. I remember I got stuck down in Jersey City one time, and then it ended because there was an 11-foot pedestrian bridge in front of me.
Uh-oh.
And now I'm on, I don't know what to do. By luck, where I stopped was right in front of the Jersey City police station, and they were doing shift change. And their head, whatever they call him, the shift sergeant, came out in a typical Jersey fashion, but basically politely told me I had to move. And I was like, I can't.
Yeah.
This bridge in front. So I was lucky, and I had a police escort. They blocked all those streets, so I could back up about 17 blocks and get out of there.
Wow. Yeah.
But so I'm not perfect. I've made wrong turns. I think keeping a cool head, and sometimes it's okay to just stop right where you are. If it's not, you got to realize, like, it's not going to get any better if I keep going forward. So stop and just try and figure out what to do from that point instead of getting so buried. And that's so true with this kind of freight I do now, because it's way harder to get out of a bad situation with these big loads than it is with a regular van. So
at some point in your career, you get, I just need to stop right where I'm at, not go any further, or, not even just on a route necessarily, but just something you're doing, trying to get out of a situation, or, you're trying to turn around in a tight spot or whatever. You need to say, I just need to stop right now before I get myself in.
I think that's true, like, for wintertime stuff.
No, big time. Yeah.
There's times you just got to stop and go really assess the situation. Like, should I even be here, or should I just, tell my company I'm done driving?
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of guys get in trouble. So,
All right. Well, we need to start wrapping this up. So let me go.
Okay.
I had a couple more questions I want to ask you, about, like you mentioned earlier that you were running a reefer, cause freight got work. Are most of these companies who do this kind of thing, can they pivot to other stuff? Do they have some dry vans sitting around, for these kind of things, or just some normal size flatbed work and stuff like that to keep you busy?
So generally speaking, in normal economic conditions, it is steady work. Mm-hmm. But like any, it is seasonal. So through the winter, it's typically slower. Mm-hmm. In my experience and the companies I'm aware of, larger companies, so like the full string that I pull, my 11 axle setup, they may look ahead and go, you know what, we don't have anything for a month for that. So they typically, companies that have setups like that will also have, 3 or 4 axle lowboys or step decks or other open deck trailers. So grab a lowboy and you're going to do, there's still smaller machines that need to be moved that are still oversized, still overweight, not as big. So that's typically what you'll do. What's not typical is to have a company that specializes in heavy haul, oversized, say, go grab a reefer and head to Alaska. That's where we're very unique, I think. We're a small company. We don't even have 30 trucks. Mm-hmm. And half of those are owner-operators. So company trucks, there's only about 12 or 13 of us. But half of those guys haul containers out of the port, and then the other half do open deck work. So I'm on the open deck side. So that means we have the equipment we have dry vans, we have containers, we have reefers, we have flatbeds. And you will see, like right now, because container freight's slow, I've seen the local container guys pulling a lowboy.
Okay.
If there's a load that needs to be moved and they don't have anything coming out of the port or going to the port, they may tell them, hey, take this trailer and go. And it'll typically be local because those guys are local with my company. So that's a little unique, like what I did run. And then that's the other thing. Not a lot of U.S.-based companies even go to Alaska. So just that, adventure is a little different. I don't know of any mega carriers at all that do it. And, that'd be a whole nother talk show. There's reasons why. But yeah, so to answer your question, typically you would just bounce back and forth between. So what a company that I've seen, they usually have their select guys that they are trained and qualified to haul the really big stuff. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that's all they do.
Right. Okay. But like your average guys who work containers on a regular basis also could not step into your shoes and do your type of work.
No, all they could ever do is pull like a 2-axle lowboy.
Right.
He won't they're not even really qualified to pull an 8-axle setup.
Right. Yeah.
At my current position, I'm the only person that can pull my trailer. There's nobody else here that has the experience to do it. Okay. We've got 2 people that were working that way because it's not good to only have one guy that can only do one thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we've got two other drivers that are doing pretty good at 8-axle stuff, and so we're trying to work them into the problem is we don't have anything between 11 and 8 axles. We need like a 9 or 10 axle setup that they could weight-wise work their way up to, because it's a big jump to go from the weight that an 8 axle can haul to the weight that I can haul. So we need something in the middle there, and that's something my boss is looking at getting this year, as a trailer that kind of fills that gap between the two. And that's, you know, and I know we're probably tight on time, but that's where a lot of people don't understand, like even what my setup is. So I'm 11 axles, but what's referred to as a 2-3-2. So I have 2 axles, 3 axles, and then 2 axles. And so each of those axle groups have different, you know, their allowable weights. And again, that depends what state and all that you're on. But there's a lot of, like what I first learned on was a 2-2-2, which would be, depending on your truck, anything from 8, 9, or 10 axles. If you got lift axles and all that. So that's my truck. I have the trailer setup I have now. If I could lift 2 of my axles, so I could be a 9 axle setup, or I can be a 10, or I can be an 11. And that all just depends on the weight, and it depends on what the state requires. Some states require all axles on the ground. Some just require groupings, you know, so I can go to almost 47,000 pounds on a tandem in most states. Mm-hmm. So, you know, most trucks you're used to is 34,000, right? So, So that's where, you know, we get a little heavier per axle group, but just when you add up all them groups, that's how we get to such a high gross weight. Right. And I've always said, once you get over about 150,000 pounds, that's where the weight really starts to play with how you drive.
Well, okay, that's a good place to end, because I would really like to know, what is the largest load you've ever done, if you can tell us about that briefly.
It was what they call a crane. It was a car body and cab is what the description is. So it was for a windmill farm. Okay. And it's one of the big cranes that actually, you know, can reach up like 350 feet or something.
Yeah.
So all I had was the actual, those things get so disassembled. I mean, obviously the boom comes apart in many pieces, and there's all these things, but the actual base of the crane where the tracks are, the tracks come off, all the counterweights come off, and this thing gets broke all the way down to literally the, you know, smallest it can be. And it was still, I forget the width. I think it was like right at 12 foot, 11 or 12 foot wide.
Okay.
Length fit in my trailer, obviously, but the weight, it was 100 and, I'm gonna screw it up. It was like 142 or 143, just that machine. So then I'm 83,000 empty.
Okay.
Put me up right at, you know, 225. So that would have been, it's between that and then I hauled an M1A2 tank.
Cool.
And that's about the same. They're about the same weight. So right at, you know, just under 230,000 pounds has been the most weight that I've ever hauled. The biggest dimension that I've ever hauled was some parts for a dam that was 22 feet wide, only about 6 feet tall, but 22 feet wide. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of 16 wide concrete prefab buildings, stuff like that. And then I've not done a lot of tall stuff. Fortunately, I'm not a fan of tall stuff.
Yeah, that seems the worst, honestly, to me.
To me, it is. I know guys that don't think twice about it, but it just, you know, I can see how wide my path is in front of me. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I'll know, like, oh, there's a car on the shoulder, I got to move over, whatever. But height has always been. So I think the highest I've ever done is like 15'5".
Yeah. Well, also height makes your, you know, the whole balance. You know,
well, you have that, but it's height's very deceptive. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's just tricky, you know, and it's like, you'll pull it, you know, I mean, just for fun for the next week, just start watching things as you're driving. When you go to the truck stop, does that fuel island tell you how tall it is?
No.
Some do. Some don't.
Yeah. Often
you know,
not.
so and it's just so nerve-wracking to me when I'm tall.
Yeah.
That, you know, or what if a bridge, the sign fell off? I don't know. I mean, I think of these things when I'm hauling a tall load, and it's like,
I don't blame you.
Even though my permit says this was a legal route, I'm still responsible. And like, what if that overpass is only 14.9 and I'm 14.10?
Oh.
So I don't like being tall, but I've done it a little bit, but I've never done the really there's guys that haul 17, 18 feet. I've never done that. And then of course length, I've had, not with this trailer, but I've had like flatbed loads that have rear overhang.
Yeah.
That's worse than being long. So my setup actually technically bends in 3 places. I've got what they call a Jeep, then the trailer, and then a booster. And so all those points will bend. Doesn't necessarily make it that much easier to get around, but obviously I'm not 120 feet fixed. You know what I mean? But I have hauled loads of pipe that had 20 feet of rear overhang on a stretched flatbed that was already stretched out to 65 feet. That's, to me, more difficult than pulling the big trailer like I run right now.
Wow.
Because now you've got a lot of rear swing, and so when you're just exiting off the freeway, you got to be careful because you might hit the light pole on the corner of the freeway ramp.
Wow.
Just because you're so long. So but all that stuff, you just you go cautiously, and that's the key to this kind of work, is just check your mirrors, know your surroundings, and ease through everything. Don't ever get in a hurry and just try and hot dog it.
Yeah. Well, I certainly take in making sure these loads get delivered safely. I'm glad I'm not the one doing it. I've said that often in the Slack groups, like, yep, you text saying what kind of load you're hauling, and I just often put one word in there. Nope. So.
It's not as bad as you think. I think if you did 1 or 2, you might actually like it. You never know.
Yeah, who knows?
It's definitely, it's something new every day.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that I've always liked about this kind of work, even when you're hauling the same load, because the route changes as you go forward, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So every day is literally a new day with new, things to
new
look
challenges.
out for.
Yeah. You can't just get into a lax mode where you're just like tooling along. You're constantly vigilant, as the Harry Potter books say.
Right. And something just as simple as even that kind of road hypnotize, that you'll get when you're hauling a dry van is terrifying when you're doing this, because it happens. I mean, nobody's perfect, but there are times that all of a sudden you'll be like, oh man, because you're zoning out. And what if there was a car on the shoulder? Right. And I'll do that. I'll be like, oh crap, I'm 13 wide. I'm not 10 wide, so you really gotta, the big thing is bridges that have the K-rail, because they always come in, right? Mm-hmm. So you may have a 4 or 5 foot wide shoulder, but when you get to a bridge, it may only be 1 foot.
Right. Yeah.
And if you're not being vigilant and you don't see that till the last minute, well, can I move over now? What if there's a car beside me?
Yeah. Well, hopefully your escorts are helping you out in that too, keeping people.
Well, you may not have an escort. That's what I'm saying. Not every load has an escort.
True. Yeah.
So that's where you really got to be, and that's what's good about this work, is I think it helps the day go by. You are paying attention more often. You're reading every sign, and you're staying more alert. And I think because of that, that's the trade-off. It's not as physically demanding as some flatbed jobs and some other jobs, but mentally it carries a pretty heavy load. Your mind is going all day.
Yeah.
You're keeping up on so much stuff that by the end of the day, even though you only went 350 miles, you're ready. You're done.
Okay, probably the most questions I hear pertaining to these oversized loads and overdimensional loads, things like this, are the permitting. And how do you get those permits? I mean, you can look in a truck that, if a bridge is, they'll say, well, you can't go on this route because there's a bridge that is under 13.6 or under 14 feet, but you don't have like a list of exactly how high that bridge is. So how do you know that you guys use for this? Or you mentioned a service that you do. Is that how most companies do it, is through a service that specializes in this stuff, or how's that work?
So there are permit services that you basically tell them, I'm loading from here and I need to deliver over here, and these are the dimensions of my load and weight. And you can tell them, I would like to go this route, and then they have a huge database with every state's restrictions, and they can run that route, and they may call you back and be like, you know what, that route was good until we got to the last 100 miles, and now we got to do something, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
As far as apps, I had looked around a few times for some, and they never seemed, I found a few, but they never seemed to be very reliable. I'm not going to say there isn't one out there. I'm not aware of it. I do know, most states, if a bridge isn't signed, let me rephrase that. If there's no marking on the bridge, it typically means it's over 15 feet. So if you're under 15 feet but over 13.6 and you come up on a bridge that doesn't have a marking on it, in theory, you should be safe. But you're right. The back of your atlas does not tell you. It only tells you low bridges. It doesn't tell over the standard height. It doesn't tell you when a bridge is 16 foot and you might be 17. That's where you have to rely on the state and the permit services and whether or not they want a route ran. And so what a route survey, let's say you were worried about height, your route survey would run that route with their pull out at whatever height you told them to and let you know if they had any strikes. But yeah, I'm not aware of an app for that. I'm actually not aware of really any apps that are very beneficial to oversized, overdimensional work.
Yeah, it seems like just such a specialty thing that it just wouldn't be worth it for the person, whoever was going to make that app. It wouldn't get their monies back out of it, it seems like.
Yeah, they would have to charge so much for a person to buy it.
And if you're spending that much, why don't you just get one of these permitting services?
Yeah, and then the services charge, typically the way they work is they charge per permit. So if you're whatever load you're doing needs 5 permits, you'll pay a fee for each one of those permits.
Okay.
And I don't want to say numbers because anybody that does this kind of, what? We only pay this, or what? We pay.
Yeah.
Every customer has a different arrangement with their permit service. So it can vary from, as low as $10 a permit up to $30 a permit. And that's just for them to pull the permit. That's not the cost of the permit.
Okay.
That's just for them to get the permit for you.
Okay. And then your company pays for that permit and
the actual cost of it.
Them. Right.
Correct.
Makes sense. Now I know you haven't worked for every oversized company out there in the world, but would you say the average company is doing that, or are getting these services, or do they have like somebody in house who specializes in all these state stuff and setting?
So I would say your smaller companies are going to use a service, and then and I don't know what number the cutoff would be for larger, but yeah, a lot of companies do have in-house. The thing with the in-house, so you have to get certified by the state to do what they call self-issue. So when you have your own in-house people that can pull a permit, it means you went through the processes to be certified to pull, and then you can go directly to that state's website and type in your dimensions and the route you want to take, and then it'll print you the permit.
So you'd have to get certified that person would have to be certified for every state that they were going to run in?
Right.
Okay.
And so that's why you see a lot of these big heavy haul things are typically pretty regional. You don't see a lot of them that just run all 48 states. There are companies that do. We're one of them, but for the most part, they're very local.
So if a heavy load does need to go from Seattle to Atlanta, just focus on one of these companies that actually can run all that distance? Or is there ever a situation where like you might haul it to Missouri and then another company would come and hook up to your trailer and take it from there?
No.
Situation like that,
no.
Is there?
Yeah. I know from personal, just the value of the equipment alone, you would never, it'd be very rare you would hand it off.
Let somebody else, here, take my really expensive equipment.
It'd have to be like somebody you knew, like two buddies, and like, oh, we're in a bind. Can you have your driver finish this load for us?
Yeah.
Now it's possible. I've never heard of it, but you might with transload actually offload and reload. But again, that would be a very extreme, mechanical failure, something massive that you couldn't finish the load.
Right.
You nailed it when you said it. As the customer, if they're looking to move something that far, they're going to look for those companies that do those types of moves. Mm-hmm. They're not going to go to, the thing is, a company that doesn't go that far isn't going to bid on that load. They're going to be like, oh, that's outside of we don't like going past Nevada, or we don't like going past here. So they're just not going to bid on it.
Yeah.
And then if it's a direct customer, they may make it lucrative enough. Hey, man, we'd really appreciate it if you would take this all the way out there for us, and then they compensate them for it.
That was actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was actually another question I was going to ask and forgot to write on my list here is, like you mentioned, they wouldn't bid on it. Do they have like a load board for Oversize, or is it just they know the companies that do it?
Right. There's some brokered freight. There's some freight that goes up on load boards. And then there's some customers that may have 3 or 4 specialized carriers that they deal with. So they'll reach out to all of them and say, hey, we've got this load. And some may just pass, be like, oh, that's out of our realm. Maybe too big. It may go somewhere they don't want to go. Or you may have 2 or 3 that are, oh, yeah, we can do that. We'll do it for this much. All right, we'll get back to you. And then they check with the other company. Oh, we'll do it for this much. And it doesn't always mean the cheapest one wins. Sometimes they look at your customer service, your safety record. You're like, you know what? You're a little more expensive, but we trust that you're going to make it without any issues.
Sure, yeah.
There's a lot that goes into it. It's not like hauling toilet paper where they just try and find the cheapest guy in the world.
Well, even that, doesn't happen all the time. There's a lot of carriers that will charge hardly anything for a load, but you don't want to use them,
Right. Exactly.
And so, I worked before the one I do now, they were kind of famous for charging a premium for like over the road services, your typical over the road service. And I was always wondering like, well, why would they pay it? Why would these customers pay it when they could get this other company? Well, like you said, service, safety record, getting it there on time, things like that. It's just more reliable. They know the load's going to be picked up on time and things like that. So all kinds of factors.
Imagine your freight is $750,000 to $1 million or more, $2 million. You probably want to make sure, you want to make sure they've got the insurance. Well, a lot of guys don't, believe it or not. So you want to, if you're the customer, you're shipping a very expensive item typically. And so that's where that service and professionalism really comes into play.
Yeah. It's like when you're buying if you're going to buy a pickup truck that costs $70,000, you're really not too worried about a $500 stereo system,
Yep.
Well, when you're hauling, you got these huge expensive loads that are already costing you a fortune, hey, maybe an extra, $1,000 or whatever for that load is not too much to ask for, because you're going to get that thing delivered securely and, not damaged.
And there's usually a lot waiting on it. They're usually for big projects, or there's, so that's the other factor. Like you might find you might find a cheaper mover, but what if they get delayed, or they didn't know that they needed a special permit for this part of the, And so now your load's stuck out in the middle of the country and your project's delayed, that could be costing you millions of dollars. So there's a lot that goes into it. And that's what we're trying to build. We're a small company, but that's the reputation we're trying to build is, we can A to Z, we can handle it all. We can take care of it, and we get it there when you need it, and all that. So
awesome. Yeah. Customer service always wins, in my opinion.
And then what we want is direct customer loads. So then we want the next time they need to move something big, they don't even pitch it to everybody. They just call us and go, hey, you did such a great job last time. Now we got this. And we're slowly getting there. In the Northwest here, we've got a few contacts, and we got people that call us first. And if we're available, that's the other problem. We may not have equipment in the area, but
being smaller, too, you might be preoccupied already. Yep. Well, it sounds like very interesting work. I do appreciate about it. Obviously there is a lot of technicality that we did not have time to get into. And, if you are interested in, pursuing this line of work, you're going to have to do a lot of research yourself, or find somebody who is willing to talk about it.
Mentor.
And, yes, a mentor. Boy, I imagine
time.
That's got to be, really necessary. Okay. Well, thanks, Travis, for coming on the show. Appreciate all your insight on this, and keep it safe out there, man.
Well, thanks for having me. And it was fun. And if anybody else has questions, refer them to the Slack group. I'll be glad to answer anything I can.
Yep. Awesome. Okay. Man, oh man, that was a lot to take in, wasn't it? Well, I want to thank Travis Jellison for coming on the show and talking about, being an overdimensional, overweight, oversized, whatever you want to call it, driver. Boy, you can tell it was just a tip of the iceberg. Boy, we were discussing how, we could almost do another show on just the technicalities, and he said, yeah, we could do a whole nother show just on the trailer itself. Well, interested in all those technical details on a trailer, but he did say if anyone is interested or wants to know more information about this stuff, there's a couple of ways you can contact him. Actually, you can do it by joining the Trucker Dump Slack group, me at truckerdump@gmail.com, and ask to join the Slack group. There's also a link in the show notes to that directly, by the way. And you can also email him directly if you'd like. Like he said, he loves to talk. Here is his email. Get ready to write it down. It is trjelli@gmail.com. That's trjelli.com. Also, if you're interested in seeing a photo of that big load that he had, you can find that at abouttruckdriving.com and search for Trucker Dump 145. That's the episode number. Or you can just look in the show. It's going to be, it's going to be one of the photos in the podcast app if your podcast app actually supports photos. So again, I hope you enjoyed that interview. I hope you're enjoying all of these of trucking jobs. Finding it really fascinating. I hope you are too. And again, thanks to Travis for coming on the show. He kind of bailed me out. I was kind of in a pinch right there at the end. And I knew we had talked about this in the past, and we finally set it up and he worked with me, and that was great. Really appreciate it. So let's say we move on to the last segment. You know what that is.
Hey, yo, bud, where do you want this load of feedback?
Here we go. This first bit of feedback comes from Robert Terry. Now, this email served two purposes. One, it told me about a really cool trucking job. And two, it told me that clear enough about the type of jobs that I'm looking for, when I interview Shannon or Travis, so I just want to read this and then I can verify it afterwards, what I'm talking about. Robert writes, "Hey Todd, I just started listening to your recent podcast this morning. So I know a while ago that you mentioned something on one of your podcasts. You said if there was someone out there that had an unusual CDL job, contact you and you might be." Well, I have one of those. You see, I work at a local food bank. I was hired in July of 17 as a driver and warehouse worker with the stipulation that I would have my CDL within 90 days. I was doing food pickups and distributions for seniors. Well, last year our organization created a new program in which I am the driver. It's a mobile food trolley called Clementine, a company that we partner with at the 2005 Workhorse Trolley in Minnesota, but it was never used and sat until November of 18 when it had only 300 miles on it. It was converted into a food truck that has an undercounter and stand-up freezer and also has a pantry section and an inside-outside produce market. We serve families with children under the age of 18. Typically, we allow 3 families at a time for 3 minutes. However, with the situation we're in now, we've in which the way the food is distributed from the trolley and staying within the 6-foot guidelines. All the other programs that have been created since this pandemic has been absolutely insane. I will include pictures in a separate email as a report that a local iHeart reporter did on it. Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to put these pictures up on my Flickr page, and I'll put a link in the show notes to those. And man, this is a really, it seems like a really satisfying job, help feeding, those less fortunate families and, taking it directly to them and driving this cool trolley around. It looks really cool. Make sure we, gave Robert a shout, and thanks for doing the work you're doing out there, Robert. But it also clarified the point that I need to be a little bit more exacting on what I'm conducting. This is definitely a unique job, and that's what I asked for. So Robert had me pegged there. But what I'm looking for is really a unique job that lots of people might be able to do. It's safe to say not every town has a trolley that they serve, needy families with. And if they do, that's really only probably 1 or 2 jobs per city. I think it's safe to say Minnesota, I don't know if it was, I don't remember what town it was, but anyway, probably safe to say that's kind of a one-of-a-kind thing. What we're talking about here is like Travis's Oversize thing, or, Shannon or Joshua being an expedited truck driver. These are all jobs that drivers could have, but they just might have never thought about it. So I'm looking at those kinds of jobs. So thank you, Robert, for writing me and telling me about this cool job. And I need to clarify what I'm asking for. Next up, we're going to hear from our old friend David White. David was the one who had the problem downloading the podcast that I mentioned earlier in the show, and it was asking about Spotify. Why I am including him in the feedback. He wrote me a little story. I always just find his stories funny. I have a feeling these are the type of thing that would be great if he would record these in his telling the story, and us hearing his inflections and everything. I think it would be funny, but I can't get David to do it. Heck, I can't even get David to update his phone so he can join the Slack group. So David, get with it. Come on, man. Anyway. And to rehash, he writes, "Greetings again, Todd. Yeah, no go on the podcast. I tried to download the 2 latest on both iPod. Yes, iPod. That old, and the phone through iTunes, and it's not cooperating. I've tried other podcasts got them downloaded. So theirs is working." And by the way, he did get the podcast downloaded. I don't know how, but he got it working. Anyway, he says, "Speaking of ducks, it reminds me I was rolling down the boulevard last night. Life is okay. Coffee is handy, and it's Friday. Then I see something in the road ahead. I get a bit closer yet. Then I see it's a pair of ducks. I'm still rolling, assuming these intelligent leave, or at least walk fast to one side. At the last second, I realize that ain't happening, and as I try a creative maneuver, so did her ladyship the duck. Must have been a creative duck. I became an out-of-season, unregulated, unlicensed duck killer. Boy, I felt bad about that one. That, of course, brought to mind the one between Daffy and Bugs arguing about what season it was, wabbit season or duck season." Dave, of course it brought a Bugs Bunny cartoon to your mind. Why wouldn't it? He goes on and says, "I'm not sure if Phil Robertson would have approved." Who knows? He says, "Members were nearby. I can still see those brown eyes." Aw. Gosh, Dave. Duck killer. All right. Thanks for writing in, David. Moving on. Do you remember in the last episode when Nate wrote in asking about free audio for truck drivers? And I pointed him to a website that pointed to a bunch of different audiobooks courses. Well, I was in the Trucker Dump Slack group one day when John Sinclair, who goes by Mouse over there, he wrote, "I was listening to the last podcast and you mentioned free audiobooks. I'm not sure if you have it over there, but in Australia we have a box. It's linked to your local library and has hundreds of free books. All you need to be is a member of your local library. It works the same as a library. You borrow the audiobook and it returns to the library in 2 weeks. And it's free. my name to that because he knows I love free stuff. Well, I thanked him for reminding me of this because I mentioned a whole bunch of sources in the last podcast, and one of them was Overdrive. And I meant to elaborate on right over the top of it. And Overdrive is not overdriveonline.com that I mentioned about 1 million times on this podcast, but no, it is a app. There's some other apps. Oh boy, I'm trying to think of the name of them that actually tie to your local library. And so if you have a library card, you can get free audiobooks. And just like this borrow box, you can check them out for 2 weeks usually and return them. They book. So if you don't listen to it in 2 weeks, you will not have access to that, although you can recheck it out. Anyway, hundreds, thousands of free audiobooks to have there. I actually, in my little town, and my nearby one, they wanted me to pay $50 because I don't pay city taxes there. So I was, considering it, but then a friend of mine that I work with, he has a library where he is out there. So he just gave me his password, and that was super nice of him. I've taken advantage of that already. Listened to a few business audiobooks that I wanted to listen to, and I'll be listening to more in the future. So that was super cool of him. Thanks, Lynn. Appreciate that. Audio, check out the Overdrive app and the Hoopla app, and there's probably a bunch more that I am not aware of, but that will give you access to your local library as long as you have a library card. And thanks to Mouse for to my attention. Really appreciate it, John. Next up, we're going to hear a funny story from a guy who calls himself Goose in the Trucker Dump Slack group. Goose is formally known as Ben Dickens de Gauss. This is why sometimes I just shorten it and just say people's first names. I like to give people credit, but sometimes last names are hard to say. So I apologize if I said that wrong. Ben Goose. Anyway, he wrote this. I don't remember how we got off on the subject, but this is the way the Slack group works. He writes, "Gather around, boys and girls, and let me tell you a story about the last place I worked. I had a single trailer on and had a bit of an adventure with about Melbourne." He's from Australia, obviously. "I had to go into all these tight little industrial areas and pick up 2 pallets of pavers at one place, some garden statues from another, letterboxes from another. You get the idea. The I need to go, and what I'm collecting then tells me, 'Oh, I got another thing I need you to get,' as he hands me an envelope full of cash. 'This looks suspicious,' I say as I look at the cash. He says with a complete, 'I need you to meet a bloke on the side of Boundary Road to get some grass for me.' I said, 'Nah, mate, not cool. I'm not doing that. What the hell?' He looks at me a bit disappointed and says, 'I don't see what the issue is. The other guys have done it, and you can just organize when to meet with him.' I say, getting a bit frustrated, 'Bloody hell, Tom. I'm not going to be your drug mule. If you want weed, you can organize that yourself and leave me out of it.' He looked at me stunned for a moment, then saying, 'What are you on about? I need to pick up a roll of fake turf.' He says, turns out the fellow works out of his house and can't get big trucks down his street. So he throws the turf on the back of his utility, meets up with the truck on the side of the road somewhere. He does it cheaper for cash, so that's how they pay him. He says, 'I didn't live that one down for a fair while.' I bet you didn't, Goose." That's a funny story. Same thing. When you started telling this story, I was like, man, no way am I picking up weed for my boss. That just ain't cool. That talk about, going beyond, above and beyond your job duties. Wow. Anyway, that was a really funny story. I appreciate it. Got a great laugh out of it. In case you didn't notice, that last feedback has to do with Slack, as do the rest of these. So just be prepared. It's not intentional. It's just the way it worked. I'm not unnecessarily, although I will at the end. So anyway, let's get on with this and see what all these good folks have to say. First up, I heard from Aaron Nero. He wrote me a simple little email. It says, "Dump invite, please. I'm looking to become an over-the-road driver, and I listen to your podcast." Well, Aaron did join, and not only that, we heard from him in the Slack group that he started on what I believe was May the 11th. Already be done with truck driving school right now. Apparently he's very busy because we haven't heard from him much. I'd like to hear from you, Aaron, in the Slack group. Give us a shout. Let us know how school's going on. But anyway, congratulations for starting school. They make those gears out of rubber, so you can grind them all you want, just like all of us did while we were in truck driving school. Enjoy. Next up, a simple little email from Evan John Cooker. He says, I just found your podcast and am enjoying catching up on them. Looking to get a job in the trucking industry in September after I retire from my current job. Well, glad to have you aboard, Evan, and looking forward to hearing from you more in the Trucker Dump Slack group into the trucking world. Next up, the simplest email ever. I would like to join the Trucker Dump Slack group from James Hayden. Well, you're in, James. That's as easy as it is. You know, it's just Trucker Dump. Send me a Slack invite. You're in. That's pretty much it. The only thing we don't allow in there is a bunch of spamming and, stuff like that. It's just a really neat idea. It's basically a glorified chat room, bunch of truckers in there. It's great. Who are going to have questions through their career and getting started and, getting a tough situation, and somebody's in there 24 hours a day, usually, to answer questions, things like that. It's just a really neat community. Love it. You should become a part into that sort of thing. If you're not, try it for a little bit. And if you're not, just duck out. We won't say anything. And I'm sorry I used the word duck, Dave. Hope that doesn't bring up bad memories. David O'Neill, a shout out in the last podcast or not. I thought I had it marked as I did, but I don't remember saying anything about it. So I apologize if I didn't, David. Anyway, he writes, "Hey Todd, I'm a new driver in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Your podcast and really enjoy it. I'd love to join the Slack group." And he did. So again, another Slack member. That's awesome. And thanks for listening and joining, David. And lastly, we're going to hear from Daniel Schmidt, member for quite a while. He's a very creative guy like me. His Trucker Dump Slack group name is Daniel Schmidt, just like mine is Todd McCann. We're so creative. Anyway, I just thought that I would share. Back on May 6th, it said, "Today marks a momentous occasion in my podcast app and my trucking career. I have completed the entire Trucker Dump discography. Only took me the better part of a year. Finally back in episode 1 to the latest release. Thanks, Todd, for successfully entertaining and educating this new trucker on countless driving hours over the past 10 months or so. Hope you get back on the road soon." Well, I am back on the road, Daniel. Words. I'm glad you got to binge listen, and I apologize for the slow release from now on. This is what happens to everyone who binge listens. They, are used to listen to 2-3 episodes a day, whatever they feel. They're stuck with one per month, and I'm sorry if that ain't quite up to snuff, but that's the way I roll. So anyway, as always, I appreciate everyone who wrote in. That'd be Robert, Ben, Evan, driver Dave, David, and Daniel. Jeepers, that's a lot of Trucker Dump Slack members. And you can be one too by emailing me at truckerdump@gmail.com. So as you can see, I love to hear from anybody. New listener, just send me an email at truckerdump@gmail.com. Just tell me you're a new listener. I'll give you a shout out on the show. I always appreciate new listeners. And, of course, if you want to join that Slack group, we're there for you there too. Well, episode as is, I guess we will go ahead and get out of here. Until next time, I hope you stay safe. Stay away from people who are coughing and hacking up lungs. That's not good. Keep your distance and enjoy your trucking life. Crank up the jams! what do you have to say for yourself? Do you have an interesting trucking job? Do you have a funny story about killing ducks or buying grass for your boss? Shoot me an email at truckerdump@gmail.com. You can also find all my contact info, all the links mentioned in this podcast, as well as information about the 25% off and $15 at abouttruckdriving.com. So, how did last month's assignment go? Did you tell a friend about the Trucker Dump podcast and help them subscribe? If not, feel free to rectify that atrocity before the next episode. Thanks for listening. So until next time, drive safe and stay out of my way. It shows that the trucking industry shed 80. But hey, don't just take my word for it. Go check out the Volvo. Go check out the new VNL series with the. Go check out the new VNL series. Go check out the VNL series with the Volvo Dynamic. Or I'm going to ping. The next one is the off-duty split sleeper berth. Boy, I always have a hard time saying that. I'm surprised that one didn't make it to the blooper rule. I'm guessing. Well, it did make it to the bloopers. How do you like that? What was that question I was going to ask? I should have written it down.
Getting the senile on.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I remember. I remember it now. You mentioned for these, I had a lot of questions about permitting. Actually, this was the most anybody was spit all over myself there. Okay.
That really becomes the truck stop counter talk then.
Oh yeah. You get three truckers.
Two or more guys that are familiar with it BSing about it. Yeah, that'd be a long segment.
I know. I just have to come in and say will be no news because there's no time.
Right.
Looking forward to helping you. Looking forward to hearing from you more in the group, and looking forward to become. Dear Lord. Holy moly, trucker dumpers, watch out. I'm all jacked up on hot tea today. Holy trucker dumpers, watch out. I'm all jacked up on blueberry hot tea. Don't mess up. Oh, man. Oh. I hate her. Folks, welcome the evil.